I recognize the member from Washington. Representative Dean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Members, I would like to at this time take a point of personal privilege. Point of personal privilege is to recognize the service for this session of our pastor for the House, Reverend Grady St. Dennis, who has been with us for this entire session, in good times and in bad, individually with many members and as a group, that he has done just a super job with us as House Chaplain. We really appreciate your service, both to us here as a group and individually, and the work that you do in the community. I would like to, at this time, recognize our House Chaplain, Reverend Grady St. Dennis, and would ask all members to give him our appreciation.
Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the Davids motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendment the concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2690, an act relating to taxation. Davids moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2690 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
I recognize the member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And yes, members, I would like to concur with House File 2690, and I'll give you a brief overview as how it's changed from when we originally sent it over to the Senate. In the bill, we freeze LGA at 2012 levels for pay 13 so that we do not see reductions. Cities under 5,000 will receive the higher of 2012 or certified 2013. It temporarily increases LGAs for the city of Tamarack because they have some issues with their wastewater treatment facility, and we take care of that issue. We provide LGA for cities who did not receive their 2000 LGA payments. That's the Swazinski bill, and many of those cities already do have their paperwork in. These are smaller cities. The paperwork's in for some of them, and if they have it in by May 31st of 2012, they would receive their LGAs. We have a temporary increase in the target property tax refund from 60% to 90% for 12 only, and we transfer $4.112 million from the Department of Revenue. So with that, members, I would appreciate your support.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Lincheski.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, will Representative Davids yield for a question?
He'll yield. Representative Lincheski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Chair Davids, I have a little question just about the process. So, House File 2690, can you tell those of us in the minority when this bill was put together and how it was made public?
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Lincheski, this is House File 2690 that passed off the House floor. It was sent over to the Senate. The Senate added some amendments and has sent it back to us. That has been the process.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Lincheski.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is not the bill that was debated on the House floor and sent over to the Senate. And members, you should know, last night, as I was working here late, I just happened to be watching the Viking Stadium issue on my computer here. And after the Viking Stadium issue passed, I was surprised to see after midnight that the chair of the Senate Tax Committee rose and brought forward a tax bill. And members in the majority may not know this, but the minority members had no idea that there was a tax bill being put together by anyone. And so we watched, or I watched, and in fact I was able to grab Minority Leader Thiessen, who was here, and we sat.
Representative Lechewski, if you could pause for a moment. Members, if you could take your conversations to the alcoves or to the retiring room, that would be really helpful. Members are having difficulties hearing. Representative Lechewski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, just a moment on the process, because I know we're at the end of session and people are tired, but the process still matters. And so, members, I grabbed the minority leader who happened to be here, and we sat in the retiring room. The doors to the building were locked. I had to get the State Patrol to let me in. This door handle was under construction, and we had to sit in the retiring room in the dark because the lights were off in the whole building. And we watched the Senate tax chair do the tax bill in the middle of the night, literally. So then I went home, and when I got home, I finally saw a spreadsheet, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker, that was posted telling folks that there was going to be a tax bill. I think it was put out for the public review at, I think, 1:04 a.m. I sent an email to the staff of Chair Davids at, I think, 2:25 a.m., still trying to understand this very bill we're debating right now, and asked the staff or the chair if he could send me a spreadsheet that I could open. This morning, at 6 a.m., I still had not received a spreadsheet I could open. Now, members, the minority, we're just the minority, but we're duly elected. I checked with the governor's office. The governor was not a part of the negotiation of this bill in any way. And as you all know, there are no DFL conferees. And so finally, I think it was about 7 a.m., I was able to see the spreadsheet. I then tried to work with nonpartisan staff at 8:47, Madam Speaker, to get them to tell me what was in the bill. And at 9 o'clock, the Tax Conference Committee took it up and voted it out. Members, you can obviously vote however you want on this bill. I think some people want to vote on this bill, and I think it'll pass. But I do think the process matters. My understanding is there's another tax bill coming that's got a similar process, no input from the governor, no input from the minority, no discussion in any significant way. And I want to note that it's disappointing to watch this process play out. Certainly you have the votes in the House and Senate, and this bill probably will get signed. But it is the fact that this body has 62 people on one side and 72 on the other, so it's pretty darn close. And it would have been nice to know that a bunch of legislators over here are going to have some benefit under this bill, those cities from the Swedzinski bill. And I would think they're going to vote for it. And some other people are going to get hurt by this bill. But we're still trying to figure it out, and I'm still waiting for the run on the bill. I hope before we vote on this motion to concur, the chair of the tax committee will bring forward the runs, because there are LGA provisions for all 854 cities in this bill. And there are no runs on our desk. There's an LGA freeze, which of course helps some cities and hurts others. And I hope as we go forward here, we're going to get to see the run before we take this vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And to Representative Lechewski's comments, at 9 o'clock this morning, there was not a conference committee on House File 2690. Members, this is a conference. This is not a conference report. This is a concurrence. There was no conference on this. This is a concurrence. You don't have conferences on concurrences unless the concurrence fails and it goes to conference. House File 2337 had every provision that is in this bill fully debated through the full tax committee, through the full House floor, and I love the late at night, locked in a room that's smoke filled, and of course, thanks to Representative Kahn, we can't even do that anymore. This has had the light of day. Every provision was in House File 2337. It was debated ad nauseum. And so this is not some sleight of hand or some, it's a concurrence, members. All of the, there's nothing else that's been snuck in here. I mean, it'd be, good for you not to underestimate my sneakiness. But on this one, nothing sneaky on this one. This is a concurrence. That's correct. There was not a conference committee because last I looked, we don't do conference committee on concurrences. Vote green.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I want to thank Chair Davids for honoring many of the Small Business Caucus bills that we supported. And to the members of the Small Business Caucus, I want to thank them for participating. And I know this is a really difficult spot for many of you, because many of the bills, as they have now materialized in this final tax bill that we're going to vote on, aren't exactly the same size and shape as what we might have supported coming out of the Small Business Caucus. Many of them, in fact, may be different enough that you wouldn't even support them now. But I do want to just list the things that we did talk about in the Small Business Caucus that I think there's broad bipartisan support for, and I'm pleased that they're in here at least in some fashion. Increasing the tax credit for research and development, the upfront sales tax exemption for small employers, increasing the angel investment tax credit, eliminating the accelerated sales tax remittance. There's even a veterans provision in here, and while that's not the one that Representative Detmer presented to our caucus, there is something in here about veterans. And members, the statewide commercial and industrial property tax relief, again, not in the same shape that many people proposed. All 6 of these were bills that we talked about and at one point and to one degree supported. So I appreciate, and I'm sure members on the other side of the aisle are very frustrated that these aren't coming forward in exactly the shape that they would have wanted in a bill that they can vote for. But I do want to thank Representative Dietrich and for co-chairing and the members for participating these last 3 years and for the good work that we did. It would have been great had we been able to bring forth the exact bills that we had indeed put our names on and voted on them straight up or down, one at a time. But I hope every member who participated in the Small Business Caucus knows that I sure appreciate their participation. In terms of a session, getting these things to the finish line straight up as we had talked about them just wasn't in the cards. So for those who can find a way to vote for the bill and be able to say that they actually did support these provisions in the end, that's great. For those who can't, you have my personal appreciation for your support of small businesses in general and these provisions more broadly. So thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Clay, Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. And Chair Davids, I would argue this is far from a non-controversial bill. And if my understanding is correct on the LGA proportions of this bill, that if you're a city under 5,000, you will get the higher amount between what you're getting this year and what you would get next year. But for cities above 5,000, it's a different story. You will get the LGA amount you received in 2012. And I guess at one time I thought it was everyone would be held harmless, but that's not the case, members. And on both sides of the aisle, listen very carefully for the impact that this bill will have on your communities. And since there are no runs here, I hope the body will give me a few minutes to go over those cities that actually, under the latest House of Representatives runs, would receive more dollars under the LGA formula next year than what they're going to get under this bill. So in effect, what I'm going to read off would be the loss to your communities of what you would get next year in local government aid versus what you will get under this bill. Here they are. Anoka is going to lose about $600,000. Brooklyn Center, $820,000. Now these are communities that will get less under this bill than they would receive under the current estimated formula for 2013. Columbia Heights, 80,000. Mounds View, 410,000. New Brighton, 581,000 less. New Hope, 200,000 less. Robbinsdale, 31,000 less. Stillwater, $462,000 less. Vadnais Heights, $10,000 less. This is from a May 9th run here from House Research. West St. Paul, $218,000 less under this bill. Brooklyn Park, $1.3 million less under this bill. Oak Grove, minus $200,000. Andover, minus $5,000. Champlin, minus $290,000. Chaska, minus $122,000. Ramsey, minus $217,000. Here are some small urban cities. Belle Plaine will lose about $39,000. Falcon Heights, $30,000. Jordan, $52,000 loss under this bill. We're on page 4. Spring Lake Park, a loss of $332,000. St. Francis, a loss of $264,000. St. Paul Park, a loss of $56,000. And now we go to the rural cities. Rural Minnesota. Hutchinson. The city of Hutchinson will lose $38,000. The city of Owatonna will lose $135,000 under this bill. The city of Red Wing will lose $288,000 of local government aid of what they should receive next year under this bill. Grand Rapids will lose $237,000. Isanti, $121,000 loss. Buffalo will lose $554,000. Cambridge, $186,000. Delano, $82,000 less to go into your police departments, fire departments, and help keep property taxes down. Elk River, a loss of $686,000. North Branch will lose $270,000. Sartell, $116,000. Sauk Rapids will lose $124,000. St. Michael, $166,000. Wyoming, $97,000. Zimmerman, $118,000. Big Lake, $241,000 loss. Now those would be cities over 5,000, because if it's under 5,000, there won't be there. So there might not be a lot of cities left. But since there's not a run out here, I wouldn't be reading these numbers. But I think members should know the impact of this bill on your communities, especially since 2003, from a $587 million certified amount, we're down to $426 million. And members, last year, there was a $101 million cut permanently by the majority from local government aid. That has really impacted our cities. New Prague will lose $58,000. Otsego will lose $154,000. Redwood Falls, $105,000 loss. And now we're to the smaller cities. So, members, there are huge losses there. That alone, the fact is that this was this has been brought forward to you as a non-controversial bill that literally was passed off the Senate floor after their 89 hours debate on the stadium. I think it was like 1 o'clock. There's huge ramifications here. And members, besides that, there's no restoration of the homestead credit, and you've heard me talk about that before. There's $4 million in this bill for the targeting program. $4 million when the cuts the homeowners last year, or the property tax increases the homeowners last year, was $71 million. Not one dime of relief for farmers. They saw property tax increases last year of $54 million. There is no significant relief in here. In fact, what we see right now on those cities that I mentioned to you that would be losing local government aid under this bill versus the formula, that would put increased pressures on property taxes and or compromising important services. So, members, there's no restoration of the homestead credit. There's no restoration of the $100 million plus of permanent cuts to local government aid. There is more pressure in this bill to raise property taxes. There's really no help for our senior citizens, no help for our farmers, no help for our families. Members, what has been being sold to you as a non-controversial bill is anything but, and in fact, looks to me like it will raise property taxes a big bunch into the future.
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and to my good friend from Clay, Representative Marquardt. I can't believe what I just heard. I didn't realize you were such a big advocate for every city outside your district. It's quite curious. And members, let's get this straight right now. No city loses a dime from their 2012 levels. Zero. Nobody loses a dime on David's Light. In fact, if you do not pass this bill, Breckenridge actually loses $33,000. Browns Valley loses $5,800. Detroit Lakes loses $85,000 if you don't pass this bill. And then, members, you know, we can go back and talk about woulda, shoulda, coulda. We could go back and talk about things that may have been or might have been. That's not where we're at right now. We're at one of the last days of session. We're trying to provide some targeted property tax relief, and it's not enough. Or, the most fascinating thing my friend from Clay said was we didn't reinstate the homestead market value credit. Oh, it only has $520 million of tails. How many times have we heard from the governor, no tails, no tails, no tails? The next bill has $73 million of tails, which is technically a rounding error in my life. And we didn't reinstate the market value homestead credit with over $500 million of tails. Governor, I bet you love that one. So let's get real. Let's not talk about what woulda, shoulda, or coulda. Let's talk about what we can do here and now. Minneapolis, members, if you do not pass David's Light, you are the biggest loser. One of the biggest losers. City of St. Paul. If you vote against this bill, you are a big loser. So let's get it straight, members. Nobody loses from their 2012 levels. Nobody. No losses. And I'm just really heartened to see what a great advocate for Anoka and Bayport and Columbia Heights that Representative Marquardt is when Chair Davids is standing up for Browns Valley, Breckenridge, and Detroit Lakes.
The member from Anoka, Representative Runbeck.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, once again, we have heard from Representative Marquardt about the subsidies, the way we are subsidizing through our property tax system virtually all cities in the state, and standing up and arguing that this is good. These subsidies, folks, are in fact enablers. They are enabling spending. When you subsidize something, you get more of it, and the studies have shown what we're subsidizing is not necessarily even basic essential services at the local government level. So let's call it what it is. There's no reporting on it. There's no accountability for this spending. There's no tracking of how it's spent, and so on and so forth. Where in state government are we spending $525 million a biennium on a slush fund? You know, that's the big question. The other question is spending. How many times have we heard Representative Marquardt talk about these funds? How many times has he talked about spending at the local level? Not once. Members, it is about spending. This is about spending. We've been through 4 years of a recession in our state. Some cities have done the great job of living within their means. A lot of other cities have not. Counties, same. So let's just listen to a list of some of the good cities. You got Oak Grove, reduced their levy last year 18%. Pine City, minus 13%. Wadena, minus 11%. Isani, minus 10%. These are people living within their means, members. Here's a bunch of cities that didn't. Center City, 17.3% increase in spending. Ely, 13.8% increase in spending. That's just from 2011 to 2012. Eveleth, 13.4%. Candy Ojai, 12.3% increase in spending. Worthington, the president of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, makes a big deal and wants to show that he's going to raise spending just to show he can do it, 11.9%. So you get my point. There's two sides of this coin. You can talk about subsidies all you want, but it's really about the discipline at the local level, and it is high time that we started to elect, in my view, fiscal conservatives at the local level who don't insist on coming here every year looking with their hand out for more. So conservatives at Anoka County cut their spending 5%, cut their levy 5%, their spending 7%. Why? Because they've got a majority of 4 conservatives on the county board. Okay? Lino Lakes cut their spending 5%. People, it's about who you're electing to these offices, and do they really intend to live within their means, or are they intent on letting something else control and control their cost drivers? This is the message, and I wonder when it will get through to you folks on the other side.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members, and I just wanted to thank the tax chair for looking after Minneapolis.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Lincheski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, members, people I'm sure are tired. There's been a lot of discussion about the Vikings. But I'd like to just speak to Minnesotans if members aren't interested in facts. I still think the voters actually are. Members, we've just heard the property tax chair call local government aid a slush fund. In fact, when we heard the tax bill last time, she called the homestead credit welfare. Just a difference of opinion. That's okay. She just said this is a slush fund and people need to get off of it, and last time the homestead credit was welfare. Now, I listened closely in tax committee, and I think, Madam Chair, that there's too much extremism here, and really both sides kind of have a point. But what you don't get to do is change the argument when it's for your things and not for the things you like. So, When the tax bill came forward, the omnibus tax bill that was vetoed, and I guess another one's coming, when that was an $800 million per year tax cut for businesses, most of the majority members of the tax committee would say that's people keeping their own money, not a slush fund. But now, if it's a homestead credit, which that was people keeping their own money, as far as property taxes, from my perspective, the other side of the aisle calls that a slush fund. You know, we can call the CI property tax cut a slush fund. And in fact, Chair Davids turned the chart around that day on the floor and said, you guys are calling this deficit spending, and you know what it is? It's tax cuts. And we can do the exact same thing on this bill here. There are tails for government choices for spending, whether it was you guys handing out money to businesses without a hope of creating a single job, or whether it was this side of the aisle fighting for property tax relief. And yes, it costs money. And so I'm glad to hear that the majority is beginning to understand that tax cuts aren't free. Somebody's got to pick up the tab for them. So there's a difference of priority here. This side of the aisle mostly thinks that if we're going to help some folks out, if we can find some money around here to hand out a tax cut, call it slush fund, call it welfare, we're going to stand by the homestead credit and local government aid over the other kinds of tax cuts that you all are for. That's okay. So we're for some tax cuts, you're for some tax cuts, we're for homeowners, you're for businesses. We get it. But let's not change the rules in the debate here. Yes, when Representative Marquardt was explaining how LGA works, and Representative Davids, Chair Davids, angrily said, you know, this has $500 million in tails. His tax bill last 2 weeks ago had $1.6 billion in tails. So I guess that was okay. When the CI was told that tax cut, removing the property tax for businesses across the state, got completely phased out in 2026, that cost the state $1.6 billion per biennium. And LGA costs the state money too. And so does the homestead credit. However, that's gone now, folks. You guys all successfully got rid of that. And in fact, in this bill that we're on, Madam Chair, 2690, that's the bill we're on. We're far afield now. Back to the bill. House File 2690 attempts a charade to say, we'll sprinkle $4 million of property tax relief on those whose taxes have gone up 12% or $100. We'll sprinkle 90% of that back to those few people for $4 million a year to make up for a program we took away from you last year that cost $520 million. 95% of all Minnesota homeowners received the homestead credit. It's gone. It cost $520 million. And you shrunk government, and you should be proud of that. But don't say you didn't take away $520 million of property tax relief to 95% of Minnesotans forever. Now, there must be some guilt in that, because now we have a bill that says here's $4 million to make up for your $520 million homestead credit. That's gone. And people can be mad that some people are still bringing it up. But we had, for most of the last 44 years, with different titles, we had a program, members, that was called the Homestead Credit, or the Market Value Homestead Credit, or HACA. Pick your flavor. And what it said is, the state is going to directly, on your tax form, step in and provide you, 95% of homeowners, immediate property tax relief. This is not the circuit breaker. You don't have to apply for it and get a check back. You got it automatically. And who didn't get it? The only people who didn't get it were a lot of people I represent. In fact, I don't get it. The only people in Minnesota who don't qualify for that program had homes valued over $414,000. And I'm one of the people lucky enough to be one of those people. But for everybody else, every one of your constituents got the homestead credit. It's gone. Now we're looking at House File 2690 that raises $4 million to try to say that's property tax relief. I mean, come on, who's fooling who here? You know, we think over here that when you give people property tax relief, you're letting them keep their own money. I mean, we can take each other's rhetoric and throw it back and forth, but if people want to run and say homestead credit is welfare and local government aid is a slush fund, go ahead. Now, I represent a city that doesn't receive local government aid, and I should just be standing here saying, let's just get rid of local government aid. I don't feel that way. 50% of people who live in Minnesota don't reside in a community that receives LGA, but 50% do. And why do some people get it and not others? It's based on net tax capacity, members. You know what? Do you want to be on welfare, to use Representative Runbeck's terms, and get a check from the state, or do you want to make $100,000 a year? Take your pick. How many people in this room want to make $100,000 a year and not get welfare, or want to make $5,000 a year and get welfare? Having to receive LGA is not the preferred situation. The preferred situation is the situation my city is in. And those of us who don't receive LGA should wear it as a badge of honor. We should say, aren't we lucky enough? Isn't our local effort low enough? Isn't our tax burden easy enough that we do not qualify because our net tax capacity is high? And so we have this program that says all of us, collectively, all Minnesotans through income and sales tax, chip into this pot that says if you live in Representative Drazkowski's community, or Representative Fritz's, or Representative Murdoch's, or Representative Johnson's, and the burden is high relative to your tax capacity, we still think you should have affordable city services at affordable prices. We think the fire truck should get there when the house is on fire. So if you want to have a debate about how much or how little we should have of it, that's one thing. But this bill, Representative Marquardt is absolutely right, members. It freezes in place a LGA cut. So how does that happen? How is that true? Here's the analogy. You have a job. You make $20,000 a year. And times get tough. And your boss comes to you and says, sorry, we can only pay you $15,000. Okay, that's reasonable. But now things are getting a little better. And the boss comes and says, I got a great deal for you. It's going to be real stable for you. You know how you're going to get $20,000 next year? Because you were scheduled. I only asked you for a 1-year cut to $15,000 in your wages. I'm going to make you permanently next year get 15 again. And you should feel good about that. That's what this bill does, members. It freezes an LGA cut of $101 million into place. Without this bill passing, the cities that Representative Marquardt read into the microphone will all receive more LGA. It's as simple as that. Vote however you want. Some cities who represent people here who represent cities like mine will say, well, this is great. I don't get LGA. I'm going to vote for this. Some people do a little better under the bill. Some people do a little worse. I would expect this to be a very divided vote. But don't kid yourselves. Don't say that when you take away the homestead credit or freeze LGA in low levels, that is welfare or slush funds, and that when you give businesses a big tax cut, that is job creation. They are both preferences. Residents, homeowners, renters, big business. We understand. Please vote no.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Kipfire.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. You know, I've heard these property tax statements over and over and over again. Did a little bit of research about this whole idea of property tax relief and just how well does that work? Well, it's interesting. In 1967, all these words about property tax relief were said back then. So what did they do? A 3% sales tax was applied for the purpose of property tax relief. In other words, they did this checkbook and wrote out to this one is from the taxpayers. They wrote out the checks, and it went to the state checkbook. Then the state wrote out a check for property tax relief. How well did that work? Well, 4 years later, statewide property taxes went up 17%. Wow, that was really successful. Over an average of 4% a year. That was really successful. So what did the state lawmakers do since it was so successful? Well, not successful at all in my book. They decided to raise the sales tax and increase more property tax relief. How well did that work? Well, lo and behold, the Office of the Legislative Auditor did a study. Just how well does it work when the state takes money from the taxpayers, puts it in the state checkbook, and writes out a check? Well, it figured out that about 80% went to increased local government spending, and 20% went to property tax relief. Those are the facts from our own legislative auditor. This idea that you can take from the people and return it back, of course, by a government formula that redistributes in some formula dictated, I don't think that is a fair way to do it. Why don't we just leave the money in the people's hands so they can pay their property taxes and be accountable to the local government elected officials for the property taxes that they charge? This redistribution, and oh, by the way, while it comes up from the taxpayers, there's a 10% loss because you have to hire people to collect the taxes and keep track of everything. And when it goes back out, you need another 10%, so that 100% that came in is maybe 80% left, if even that. It just plain doesn't work. And the facts show it doesn't work. The state has no business in doing that. So when you take a look at the commercial, okay, so they thought, wow, this was so effective. Let's do something else. So what they did is about 10 years ago, they put on another program, the market value homestead credit, because all our local property taxpayers were complaining again. So they tried this credit program, which was really the county or the entity would give the credit, and then they would be left with the price tag, because over these 10 years, you guys here in the state legislature did not fund the credit program. You didn't fund it. It's a shill game. It's false. And so your counties and local governments were left holding the bag. Is that fair or right? And then it's put on their own tax statement. It's not honest and it's just not right. So we finally ended the shell game. It's not honest. We did away with it, and we are working on reestablishing local control, local responsibility. And yes, Representative Runbeck, as you said, there are local units of government who have been good to their people, who have taken that responsibility and lived within their means. It goes to show it doesn't have to be. It's a local decision. On the commercial industrial property tax, the heaviest burden, and by the way, as my local units of government have told me, that state property tax, commercial industrial, is the biggest hindrance to them getting local businesses in their local areas. They have no room. The state takes the property tax money and they take it to the state level, and just because you redistribute it in some other formula doesn't make it right. One of the best tools that local governments have is property taxes. And so you are really disturbing the very tool that the local units of government have, and it should be up to them and up to their local people to decide what is the amount that they can handle. So when I talk to other commercial building owners, their biggest problem is, why are they so empty around there? Because the taxes are so high that the lease arrangements are not able, small businesses are not able to afford to pay the cost on those buildings. And so now they are left standing, going empty, and it's a real problem for them. One of the things in this bill is a freezing of those commercial industrial property taxes for 1 year only, but at least it's 1 year. If you really want to stimulate the economy, you've got to give the business level some certainty. If we had frozen this forward, going forward, it would have given that commercial building structure, commercial businesses, an opportunity to be able to go forward and to make leases, to sell buildings, and to do things. And this is a state property tax only put on at the state level. And so, members, this bill takes one small step. Thank you, Representative Davids, for understanding the business structure, the dynamics that work there. And members, tax relief, property tax relief that is taken from the people to the state and then put back out there by the Office of the Legislative Auditor doesn't work. And let's be honest about it, it just doesn't work. And this tax bill is one step in the right direction. Members, vote green.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Davids, would you yield for just a couple really quick questions?
He yields. Representative Norton.
Thank you. Representative Davids, is the fix for the food and beverage change in Rochester in this bill?
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Norton, no.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If Representative Davids would yield again.
He yields.
And I'm talking, we talked a little bit about earlier, actually I think they were your words about what might have been. We shouldn't be talking about what might have been, but that's kind of what I'm talking about right now. And we have some opportunities lost here. So I just, the opportunity to repair a change that our cities requested concerning food and beverage taxes, it was just a shift. It wasn't controversial in any way. It's not in this bill. And so I'm wondering then, is the change to the provider tax for Mayo Clinic's lab in this bill?
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Norton. Neither of those issues are in this bill. They're in the next bill. They're both in the next bill.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
And last question for Representative Davids, if he'll continue to yield. My friend over there who's moved from his seat, Representative Downey, was going on and on about the Small Business Caucus and all the great bills, and I think he too was talking about a different bill and not this bill. So could you clarify for me, are all those great ideas that the Small Business Caucus came up with and other non-controversial and bipartisanly agreed to provisions, are those in this bill?
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Well, I don't know about what all of the Small Business Caucus had come up with, but I do know that some of them are in the conference committee report, not in the concurrence.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Davids, I'm really disappointed to have no answer to all three of those questions, because those are non-controversial provisions. They're things this body could have all agreed to, and this is a bill that would have been a great vehicle for those types of provisions. Instead, what's happened here, members, is that the really good work that the Small Business Caucus does and the non-controversial provisions, two of which are for my community, could be in this bill and could be on the governor's desk and signed. And instead, they're in a very controversial bill that has not been conferenced with the governor or any Democrats, and I'm afraid we're going to have some opportunity loss that we're all going to regret in the long run. So, Representative Davids, I appreciate your honesty on those answers, and I'm very concerned that they're not in this bill. Though I may vote for this particular bill, an opportunity has been lost here today.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will Representative Norton yield to a question?
She yields. Representative Dean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Norton, I am by no means a tax expert, and I'm trying to read through the summary of the bill. I'm reading through it. I listened to Representative David's explanation of the bill, and I've listened to Representative Linczewski's comments on the bill, Representative Marquardt's comments on the bill, and your characterization, Representative Norton, of the bill. As I read this bill, it looks pretty simple. It does a couple of little things, very small things, to help people in the state of Minnesota. Doesn't include things that you would have liked to have included in bills, doesn't include some of the things in my bills that I would have liked to have had included that didn't get done this session. But what I'm really trying to squint my eyes, focus on, I'm trying to come in and find it here. I don't see it. I look at the bill. I need a little help. Could you tell me what is controversial that you've brought up, Representative Norton? You said this bill is controversial. You've brought up some difficulty. What is controversial within this bill that you do not like?
The member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't say I didn't like anything in the bill, Representative Dean. In fact, if you had listened, I said I might well be voting for this bill. The problem with this bill is instead of it including more things that would actually grow jobs and help Minnesota, those good provisions are stuck in a bill that won't pass. So, Representative Dean, thank you for your question. I think there's a few things in here that are perhaps helpful, as it was shared by both Representative Linczewski and Representative Marquardt, who are far more knowledgeable about tax issues. I've never served on that committee, and I do think there are winners and losers in this bill, and it'd be nice if everybody could be winners. I don't think that happens in this bill. I think what's wrong with this bill is what's missing.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Norton. I think we're both on the same page. Maybe we have a difference of opinion about the next bill, about whether or not that's controversial. I really hope that we could say that we can at least agree on this one, have this one be non-controversial. Maybe for some of the folks who are still watching on TV, maybe thinking that this is part of a stadium discussion, they're maybe thinking, hey, maybe they could actually get along with each other and agree on something that is a good idea, shake hands, vote green, and move on to the next thing. I think that would be a good idea. And maybe we could save that discussion for the next bill. I've also read the summary and kind of glanced ahead at the bill for the next David's bill. I don't find that one controversial either, but I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to listen. But for those some of those sports fans that just happen to be tuning in and learning a little bit about the legislature, let's just give them just a little bit of something, of some bipartisanship. Let's show them that we can actually agree that there's something good that we can do. Shake hands, agree on it, vote green, and move on.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, I'm struggling, and I'm a member who tries to pay attention in the Tax Committee, and some of these things we saw, and some of these things maybe I don't quite remember. I got kind of excited when I saw an increase in an automobile insurance surcharge, and then I realized that if you keep looking at it, and I went to the Senate description, which isn't up to date either, that it's actually just about changing who collects it, but it's all new language. It looked to me like we were increasing car insurance rates, but we're not. But this bill, when it left the floor, was 45 pages. And it's now 138. And even for those of us who have sat through a lot of hearings over the last months in Tax Committee, have a hard time skimming 138 pages without a summary and figuring out what's in here. So please have patience with those of us who are trying to understand this. We know some speakers have talked to things that are in the next tax bill. Some of us are still trying to figure out what's in this tax bill. And so, Madam Speaker, if the chair of the Tax Committee would yield, I'd just like to explore a couple of things because I'm not sure what's here.
He'll yield. Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Chair Davids. My question is, I see a lot of little provisions that deal with cities that came before us and had particular things they wanted to deal with. You know, the Cook and Orr ambulance and the aggregate minerals tax for Vergas and the Proctor food and beverage tax and something for Clearwater and Itasca. And there's all kinds of stuff in here. But when I'm just quick whipping through this, I couldn't see the one thing that Hennepin County and Ramsey had a very long hearing about, and that is to extend their local environmental response fund, which is what we use to clean up our polluted industrial sites so that they can be redeveloped, to clean up the things that are, you know, sins of the past in our community. And we had some really impressive testimony and pictures from developers that showed really trashed places that have been turned into actual workplaces as a result of these investments. And is that in this bill or is that in the next tax bill? I still don't quite understand what's in one bill versus what's in the next.
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Loeffler, you listed about 16 things. Could you kind of go are you talking about, if you could please restate the question.
Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was saying that I was kind of listing that I found all these different things, but I hadn't found the thing that I was looking for, which is the extension of the Hennepin County and Ramsey County environmental response funds in here, because that would probably be like 2 lines, and I can't find it in the 138 pages on my own.
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Loeffler, no.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Chair Davids, is that to be in the next tax bill then? Or could you explain to us why that wasn't considered in the Senate, since they've added almost 90 pages more than what you had in your bill? So could you tell us what the Senate thinking was, or did they consult with you? Or why do you think we should concur rather than go into conference committee and add a few things that House members want?
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Loeffler, I can never understand how the Senate thinks. I cannot do that. That being said, the Environmental Response Fund bills are in neither this bill or the next one we'll be hearing. I liked them. They're very good provisions. Representative Depke did a great job on behalf of Hennepin County. Representative McFarland did a wonderful job on behalf of Ramsey County. But they didn't make the cut. They're not in here. And yes, there could be another conference. Well, no, there probably couldn't be if this bill would go down. Just all the cities would, many cities would lose a lot of LGA. And it's not in this bill. It's not in the next.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker, and Chair Davids. But we have another option here, which is to not concur, let you do the traditional thing, which is to go to a conference committee, and then you could get a couple of those things that the House thought was good in the mix. You know, the Senate's got their additional 80-some pages, and you could add maybe another 10 or 20 and make bipartisanly some people here happy. I know the Environmental Response Fund had bipartisan support from legislators of both parties from Ramsey County and Hennepin County with a large list of authors. And I think if we refuse to concur, we could do that very quickly. You could say to the Senate, we don't have problems with your extra 80, 90 pages. We'd just like to add an extra 10 or 15, and in the debate on the floor, our members really thought that was important, and we can do it real quick. I'd be glad to encourage our members to pass a conference committee report real fast. I know our staff puts them together really fast, and so I think we ought to think about that. Thank you.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for waiting on me so I had a chance to cool down. One of my mayors was called out basically by name, and so I got him on the phone, and when I shared with him what was said, he needed some time to cool down as well, so he called me back. And it just reminds me of some of the things that I want to live by, if you will, some words of wisdom that was given to me by my mom and Senator Vickerman when it comes to Bates. And Senator Vickerman, he was a gentleman, as we all know, and he said, Rod, you can hold your ground and still be approachable, and so make sure you choose your words carefully, especially if in the heat of the battle, if you will. You know what? We had a very dear friend. It was Bob Filson. He was actually a constituent of mine, and there's an award named after him for the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. There's an award named after Mr. Filson, who lost his life with the battle of cancer. And it's an award for rural leadership, and Bob was the city administrator for the city of Worthington, so he worked extremely hard promoting local government aid and letting everybody understand the need for local government aid. And when Bob was in hospice, I went down and visited him, and it was extremely difficult. Of course, I was in tears, and he was as well, and when I was ready to leave, he grabbed me by the hand, and he said, Rod, remember one thing, it's not political, it's civic, so do the right thing. So I try to live by that as well, you know, and I also try to remember what my mom told me is do not hate the opposition, but respect them, for they too are standing up for what they believe in. So I've had some time to cool down here a little bit, and like I said, I talked to my mayor, and we're talking about local government aid, and the reason for that, he reminded me, the vision initially was that no matter where you lived across the state of Minnesota, that the quality of services would remain basically constant throughout the state of Minnesota. And that's why this was put in place to begin with. And he also reminded me that we had extremely difficult times. We all understand that. The way the economy took a turn for the worst, we had to make reductions. And you take a look at the market value homestead credit, that was brought up here as well. Local government aid, reductions that were made there. And, you know, I can sit here, and when I was confronted back home about the market value homestead credit, and it was by a very good friend of mine that I'm working with, I said, look, if you didn't want me to vote for that, why did you come and advocate for us to do away with that program? It wasn't properly funded 9 out of the 10 years. You know, don't tell me to do one thing if you're going to turn around and beat me over the head about it later. So anyway, we can talk about that during the next election. But like my mayor said, he goes, Rod, take a look at this. It was referred to 11% increase. He said 7.9% of that was decertified TIF. He said it was a one-time deal. He said, so you take a look at it, it's actually a 4.3% effective increase. So you take a look at the decreases that we have, and there has been some. We'll acknowledge that. He said, we'll do our part. We'll acknowledge that there's decreases. So we've done everything we possibly can to hold down as far as the spending requirements as well. And he said if we're not doing a decent job locally, the locals will take us out in the next elections. That's the way it's set up. But you know, he also doesn't think it's fair that we can be armchair quarterbacks or whatever the case may be up here and criticize them for what they're doing back home either. Again, this was put in place so that no matter where you lived across the state of Minnesota, that you could offer up those services basically the same anywhere else in the state. And we don't have the $1 million homes out in rural Minnesota. We don't have the Mall of America or whatever the case may be. You know, we struggle to make ends meet, but we want to make sure that the place is safe, that we can put out fires when it happens, that we can have police on the street, patrolling the street, and that we can have some amenities or whatever the case may be as well. And so I put a lot of trust in the individuals who make the decisions back home. Some of them are Democrats, some of them are Republicans, but you know what? They're good people. And again, they're standing up for what they believe in. And you know what? If I can be so bold, I'm going to ask, can I do this? Can I ask the governor to sign this bill? Can I do that? You know what? Me and the governor, we had a great time the last few days. We were traveling Minneapolis. We were downtown at a bar. He's a pretty cool guy. You know, we were talking about what we need to do on the Vikes and everything else. So if I can give a shout out to my friend the governor on why this is an important bill to be signed. Chair Davids did a great job bringing this one around too, and I still think this one's smoking hot. I think this is a smoking hot tax bill. I still do. There's provisions in here from the Greater Minnesota Cities, the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. When it comes to the LGA provisions that are still in here, and Representative Marquardt, we may disagree on this and how it's calculated, whatever else, but we're not going to disagree on the importance. I think you and I can agree on that. You take a look at the angel investment language that is in here. You take a look at the intern programs and stuff like that. There's a lot of good things in here. The way I understand it, there's provisions in here as well for student loans. So if I could be so bold, like I said, Governor, this is a smoking hot tax bill. And I hope like hell you can, I'm an uneducated hog farmer. Sometimes that happens. I hope like heck you can sign this. This is a good bill. Would Chair Davids yield for a question, please?
He'll yield. Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I apologize again for, you know, like I said, my mom will be washing my mouth out with soap. I apologize sincerely. Chair Davids, my question to you is nursing homes. As far as nonprofits, nursing home, the tax status, is there language in this bill to address that?
Member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Chair Hamilton. That's in the next one.
Okay.
Member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
All right. Thank you, Madam Speaker. So not only do I ask the governor to sign this one, but I'm going to stand up and ask him to sign the next one too. So, but once again, like I said, you've done a great job on this bill as well. And the individuals that were criticizing local government aid and criticizing the mayors of my district, I guess I just want you to know I didn't appreciate that. I appreciate all the hard work that my mayors do back home. And with that, Madam Speaker, thank you.
Member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I'd just like to clear a couple of things up that my good friend from Bloomington had to say. She said on this House floor that I spoke angrily. I only speak with peace and love. It was not anger in any way. It was excitement. Because when you get to talk about a tax bill like this, you get excited. And so it's excitement. And as far as I believe my good friend from Bloomington talked about, we must be doing something because we feel guilt. And I was brought up Methodist, so I know how to feel guilt quite well. But I feel no guilt. You never feel bad for doing the right thing, members. Members, I misspoke in my caucus. The question was asked in my caucus, are the provisions of 2690 also in the conference report of 247? They're not. They're not. So members, this is it. My good friend from Clay was going through some numbers, and that's good. The numbers he was reading for 13, they were correct, but I'm saying there's no cut from 12. But you look at a Duluth, a Mankato, Moorhead, a Rochester, St. Cloud, they really get hurt if you don't vote for this bill. So members, I'm sure there's, hopefully the debate's wrapping up on this one, but that's out of my control, obviously. I just want to make it very clear that this is the only chance you get on this one. This is it. So I do not speak out of anger, ever, but I speak out of love and joy. So please vote green.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, let's just continue with the love and joy, Representative Davids. We'll just keep on in that vein. We'll just talk very calmly and sweetly about this tax bill. But, Madam Speaker, I wanted to see if Representative Runbeck would yield.
She yields. Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Runbeck, I heard you refer to LGA as a slush fund. I think I understand where you're coming from. I know there are different points of view on this floor, even though we're all talking about LGA with love and peace in our hearts. But I wanted to ask you, Representative Runbeck, the discussion's gotten kind of far afield here from the bill that we're actually on, and as I think about this bill, I wanted to ask for your opinion. If I vote for this bill that's before us, House File 2690, am I voting for LGA or against LGA? I wonder if you could help me with that.
The member from Anoka, Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Liebling. Let's just talk about call it tough love. I think that there certainly is a fine place for LGA, and LGA is needs based. Okay, and I've looked at this and seen that many of our small cities do indeed rely on it and need it. So I think where the difference is, we have a formula that's needs based. Market value homestead credit, there was no needs based factor to it. There was no income sensitivity to it. It didn't respect any of those key factors that we have in the other aspects of our property tax program. So needs-based subsidy, let's really understand where we're going on that. And so we have an LGA study committee. It's been around for a couple of years, and the 2013 LGA formula will expire. So next year will be a very critical year for giving a good, hard academic look at what we are doing with these subsidies. So I'd say it's a vote for LGA.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I know there's been a lot of discussion on this floor about how property taxes were raised by the bill that was passed at the end of the last session, but that I think is a little far afield from the bill that's in front of us, and appreciate your answer, Representative Runbeck, that this bill supports LGA. And I have another question for the tax chair, if he would yield.
He yields. Representative Liebling.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Davids, a lot was said at the beginning of this discussion about how this was rushed through, and I appreciate your response that this is a concurrence and not a conference committee and so on. But, this is, to my mind, the third time in this session that major pieces of legislation have come to us in this form without proper vetting. And I've discussed a couple of them before. So that really does concern me. And one of the things that's really concerning me about this particular bill is there is a lot of confusion about this bill, and I think that a lot of that confusion would have been cleared up had it been done in a little more timely manner. And I want to point out to you that as I was sitting here, I got a note telling me that indeed that the provisions that you told Representative Norton were not in the bill were in the bill. So I found a copy of the bill. I went outside, they didn't have a copy. I went to the desk, I was told, here's the bill. I looked at the bill, I found what I thought were the provisions, and on page 124, and then there was a whole lot of scrambling around here, and maybe people have noticed that staff and members have been kind of running back and forth, and then lo and behold, I see that what I've got here, what members have been given, that looks like the bill that we're talking about, House File 2690. It has Chief Author Davids on the front, and that indeed the language that's in here isn't actually the language. So now I understand now that the Rochester provisions are in fact not in the bill, even though the bill seems to say they're in the bill. And so I just want to ask Representative Davids if he would sort of explain to the body why what you see before you in black and white, in fact, is not before you, and how, and I understand this isn't your fault, Representative Davids, but I do think the body deserves to know what we are dealing with today and why it's before us in the form that it is. So I wonder if you would yield then and explain that to the body.
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much, my friend from Olmsted. First of all, if I was able to, but I think there's House rules that say you can't do it. This passed the Senate 64-0, but I don't think you can say that on the House floor. Okay, so with that being said, members, this bill is correct. Now, the Senate does it a little differently than we do because they don't do the unofficial engrossments and all those types of things. So if you look at the bill, you have to look at the first 10 pages and then Article 7, because all the other articles have been deleted. If you go to page 10, you'll see on page 23, delete Article 2, page 20, and so on and so forth. So the Article 7 we left in here is some technical cleanups that House Research, Mr. Joel Michael, put together some deleting of unnecessary language and obsolete language. So Article 7 is still in. So members, we should, even though the Senate does it a little different, and somebody earlier tried to have me explain why the Senate does what they do, and I'm not able to do that. So members, if you look at the first 10 pages, it's written correctly, you just got to read it. You just have to read it. It's correct. It's the first 10 pages. Look at page 10. It shows what's been deleted. Section 7 is still in. Much of the other information or proposed legislation will be in the next bill that we take up. So I'm sorry if there's any confusion, but just please read the bill. It's right there, and if you read it, it's very clear. If you go the first 10 pages, include Article 7, and we have House File 2690, the concurrence. And thank you, Representative Liebling.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Davids for that explanation. And, you know, members, I think what this tells us is how poor our process really is. And, you know, here we are talking about a tax bill on what may be the last day or next to the last day of the session. We're 10 days or so past when we were supposed to be adjourning. We were told we were adjourning, and we're rushing stuff through so that the staff doesn't have time and the front desk doesn't even have time to be sure what we're doing here and what we've got in front of us. And I appreciate your explanation, Representative Davids, but, you know, I've heard a lot from the other side of the aisle and from people who were angry about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and what do you hear from people in the public? Read the bill! Why didn't you read the bill? You know? They were outraged that they thought that people had passed big changes without reading the bill. Well, members, I try to do my homework. I know some of you try to do yours. And in this case, read the bill was a pretty darn hard thing to do. Now, Representative Davids is sitting here saying, oh, well, just read the bill, but, you know, I've been trying for the past 20 minutes to figure out which bill I should even be reading. So the other thing is that this bill wasn't posted until 1 a.m. this morning, 1 a.m. So if you all watching in the public want to be sure that your representatives read the bill, you should be very, very concerned about what's happening here today. Now, does that mean that this is a bad bill? No. But I think the other side, some of you members might have gotten a little burned at the end of the last session when you voted for something that you did not know what it did, because somebody told you you should vote for it. And we know that happens around here an awful lot. And we know we've got a lot on our plates, and I often tell people, I'm sure you do too, that being around here often is like drinking from a fire hose. It's literally impossible to read everything we vote on. But for goodness sakes, we ought to at least have a fighting chance to read it. We ought to at least have our staff have a fighting chance to read it. So, you know, it's all well and good for Representative Davids to tell us that the senators all voted for this. You know, that's the one piece of information. But, you know, when the senators voted for this, they voted for it after, what, 10 hours of discussion after the Vikings debate? I mean, have you ever felt in the middle of the night like you were burned out, you'd asked as many questions as you could ask, and you just didn't have it in you anymore to go after a bill and find out what it said the way you really should? Well, I think that's what happened in the Senate last night. Now, am I saying it's a bad bill? No. It may be just a fine bill. You know, I'm probably going to vote for this bill because Representative Runbeck told me it supports LGA, and I like LGA. But members, this is what the process has come to this year. Poor time management. This is poor time management. This bill didn't have to wait till the end. It didn't have to be voted on after the Vikings discussion last night in the middle of the night when only the night owls are paying any attention. And the poor staff, they get burned out too. For goodness sakes, I don't know how they manage half the time. So members, I just think this is a case study. This is a case study in poor process, in poor time management, and I hope that the members of the public are watching.
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Madam Speaker and members. I'd like to thank Chair Davids for bringing back this bill again, trying to get a tax bill that we can agree upon and get the governor to sign, because this is extremely important. From back in my district, I think I have 23 or 24 small towns back in my district, and they rely heavily as part of their budget on the LGA revenue they get back from the state. So this is extremely important for many areas of rural Minnesota. And just one last thing, Madam Speaker. When I've been down here these last couple of years, I hear on occasion a lot of bashing of our local governments. And frankly, I don't think it's very well placed that we tell them that they have to cut all of their spending and things like that, and I don't think it's fair. We were at a Reform 2.0 meeting this summer. I think we were in Wilmer, and talked to a lady from one of the smaller towns in west central Minnesota, and she was very concerned about an upgrade they had to do to their sewage treatment plant with rules that we pass on to them from PCA and in this case also EPA, a couple of $1 million. She didn't know how they were going to pay for it. So for us to tell our local governments, our towns and cities and counties that they have to cut spending, and then we ask them to do more and more in terms of regulations and things like that, I don't think that's fair. And again, I want to thank Chair Davids for passing, getting this bill back on the floor, and hopefully we can get it to the governor. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is not a good bill, and for those of you on my side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle who are thinking about voting for it and thinking the good might outweigh the bad, let me just tell you what this says to the northwest suburbs. What's the polite way to say screw you? Take a look at what it does to the northwest suburbs of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. It says, memo, Republican tax bill wants to raise your property taxes and hit you harder than any other part of the state. This bill will cut Anoka $34 per person. Brooklyn Center, $27 per person. My city of Brooklyn Park, where 1 in 5 homes are in foreclosure, we have almost no commercial and industrial tax base. The homeowners pay almost the full freight on the school levies and the city property tax levy, and we have an enormous police force because we need it. And this cuts my residents $17.28 per person. Every man, woman, and child in the city of Brooklyn Park. I mean, that's half as much as he cuts my friend Representative Abler up in the city of Anoka. The city of Champlin, $12.57 per person. Every person in the city. City of Ramsey gets cut $9 a person. Buffalo and Elk River really get whacked. $35 per person in the city of Buffalo and $30 per person in the city of Elk River. What this to me says is that the Republican effort to put together a tax bill takes money from the northwest suburbs and then spreads it out in other areas to buy off some votes. But where you're getting $600 in one city or another, you're taking it from my residents. You're taking it from Representative Hillstrom's residents. Who represents Buffalo and Elk River? You really think your folks should pay $35 and $30 per person so that Representative Davids can give your money to somebody else? And Representative Davids, I would ask you to yield to a question, because I don't remember in calendar year 2012 any tax bill going through the tax committee that hit the communities of the northwest suburbs this hard. And so, Representative Davids, I would ask you, you said this provision was heard in the tax committee. Do you mean in calendar year 2011 or do you mean in calendar year 2012?
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Portman, these provisions were in House File 2337. So they went through the tax committee, they went through conference committee, and they went to the governor. And you voted against, unfortunately.
A member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Well, clearly I had a good reason, Representative Davids. You know, we've worked together really well. We've had a very warm personal relationship. But when I look at the pattern, I bring donuts, he brings coffee. I think that's warm. I don't know. When I look at the pattern of who gets hurt in this bill, I'm really, how do I explain to the people of the northwest suburbs that they're totally getting whacked? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You're giving $300,000 here and $300,000 there, and you're taking $1.3 million from my community, which is not a wealthy community. The average income in my community is $48,000 a year. That's combined household income. These are not rich people. I've been to 10,000 houses in my district in the past 6 weeks. Been driving by them and walking up to a lot of doors and been to a lot of newspaper boxes. And I can tell you there's a lot of people who are really struggling, and we can't afford a cut like this. I just want to understand why it is the city of Brooklyn Park is getting hit harder than anybody else in the state of Minnesota, $1.3 million, Mr. Chair. And I would also like to say the city of Brooklyn Park hasn't really gotten much in LGA at all since the Palenti cuts of 2002.
Member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And to my good friend from Hennepin, I would just say, and it probably wouldn't go over real big, but I would just say that you're being cut nothing from 2012, and they're not getting what was projected as an increase, but they're not getting cut from what they've ever had. So they're not losing anything that they've ever had as far as 2012, but they're not getting what they could have had nothing been done here. But the way the formula is working so far, there's so many more cities, and it's just the way it works out when you make some decisions here. So many more cities get cut significantly if we don't pass this. I mean, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the regional centers, and most all the small cities. Over 600 cities would lose local government aid if we don't pass this bill. And there are some that will not receive projected increases, but they're not losing from what they received previously.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Davids, all I know is if your bill fails, my city gets $1.3 million in local government aid in 2013. If your bill passes, my city does not. I know the city of Anoka, the city of Brooklyn Center. When you look at the runs, folks, look at the northwest suburbs and look at the message that this sends to the northwest suburbs. We'd like to cut you, and here it comes.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Davids yield?
He yields. Representative Mullery.
Representative Davids, as you know, I carried a bill this year that helped out the people on the north side that have been so hard hit by the tornado, and fourth in the north half of our country on foreclosures, where people forget that we're actually the fourth worst area in the northern half of the entire United States on foreclosure. And then last year got hit with the largest area tornado, I believe, in history. This bill was to help the north side in that tornado area. It passed unanimously in committee, and there was no opposition. All of the people of Hennepin County and Minneapolis, who were the only ones really affected by it, supported it through their representatives. Is that in either as Representative Loeffler pointed out, we could put it in this if we'd send it back and not concur. The other one is a conference committee report, so we can't put it in that. Is it in either one of these?
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Mullery, no.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Davids, I really don't know what is going on here with a small group of people from other parts of the state and the Republicans deciding what people in Minneapolis and Hennepin County have decided is needed for them. The environmental cleanup tax, which you said isn't in either one. You referenced that Representative Depke did a good job on working on it, and yet it's not in here. When I carried that during a Republican control of the House, when Representative Swigum was Speaker, I carried the extension on that even though I was in the minority party, and we had every single legislator from Hennepin County had supported it and thought it was a good idea. And it basically only affects Hennepin County. And yet you're rejecting something that's supported by all of the people of Hennepin County, basically. Now we have another one that I brought up. And by the way, I know that there's a lot of members on your aisle. For instance, Representative Gunther was very active on that bill on the environmental cleanup because it goes along with his brownfields and his redevelopment fund. They're all things that are needed for helping older cities, which can be outstate Minnesota or inner city. And yet we're rejecting, other people are rejecting it in this case, what the people of those areas want. And it's the same with the bill for the Minneapolis tornado area. It's supported by Hennepin County. It was supported by City of Minneapolis. They're the basic people involved, and I just don't understand. I wish the Republican leadership on the tax committee would recognize what the people of those areas feel is important to help their areas.
Any further discussion? The member from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Well, it's been a confusing bill discussion because when I first spoke, I talked about how our House version went from 45 pages to 138 because that's what was handed out on the floor. And then now I realize it actually, instead of growing, shrunk from 45 pages to 10. And in case the public is watching, I just wanted to point out to residents from the cities of Cook or Vergas, Proctor, Clearwater, and Itasca, who I had mentioned were having their issues addressed in this bill, that they're not. And I'm sorry I misled you. We had a big bill in front of us, and it turns out that's not the bill we're discussing. And so they are in the same situation of many of us who've just been talking about having their hope for projects not be in this bill, and I suspect they're not in the next bill either. So just want to clear the record. Thank you.
Members, any further discussion? The member from Marquardt, Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. And, you know, Chair Davids, I know what you were trying to do with the provision on the local government aid, because the last 2 or 3 years with the unallotments and so forth, the cuts were made away from the formula and based on levy plus aid. And so next year, going back to the formula created winners and losers. And this bill does the right thing for those under 5,000, those cities. It says that we'll take the higher of the number between 2012 and 2013. and that probably cost about $1 million. You could have put in a few more millions of dollars and actually done the same thing for all cities. And so you could have taken, the higher of the number between 2012 or what you would get on the formula, and then you wouldn't have the winners and losers. And actually, what I think is some big things that need to be considered here, and that would have cost a few more millions of dollars. But I think in what Representative Liebling says, it does point very much to this flawed process where, had there been more work done or more time on this specific bill at this time, and granted it was in House File 2337, you could have had, chances for amendments to improve this portion of it. But even with all of this, I don't want members to lose sight of the fact that there's really no restoration of the over $100 million of permanent local government aid that was cut last year. And if we were at those amounts that were certified for 2011 before the permanent cuts, cities like Mankato, that is getting $6.2 million in local government aid in this bill, if we had restored these cuts, would be getting about $8 million. So it's not like anyone's really gaining in this. You look at Albert Lee, $4.7 million in this bill, but if there had not been the local government aid permanent cuts, they would be getting about $5.3 million, $600,000 more. Crookston would be getting about $300,000 more had there not been those permanent local government aid cuts. East Grand Forks would be getting about $340,000 more. Thief River Falls about $240,000 more of local government aid. Money that goes to our communities, as Representative Hamilton said, to make sure that wherever you live in this state, you can roughly have the same level of services at roughly the same cost. Representative Hamilton was right on. Right on. Wilmer's going to lose, $430,000 if the cuts hadn't been there. Worthington, about $300,000. And so, members, those cuts, those permanent cuts last year really hit hard. Local government aid is the lifeblood to our rural cities. And it does trouble me when I hear the chair of the property tax division over the last 2 years criticize local government aid and others, calling it a subsidy, calling it an enabler, calling homestead credit welfare, saying that this is the beginning of the phase out of local government aid. That troubles me, because that's a real threat on rural Minnesota and communities that need those funds and their quality of life. And Representative Davids had talked about a couple of cities in my communities, and I'm proud to say that I'm looking out for the entire state as I read the number of cities that we're going to lose. I'm proud that I am a state representative. But, the city of Breckenridge lost in market value credit and local government aid $188,000 from current law. They're going to get back about $33,000 in this bill. Browns Valley, which was another city mentioned, lost about $16,000. They're going to get back about $5,000. City of Dilworth, my hometown, lost about $160,000. They would get back about $40,000. Members, I don't think that's really a good deal if I take $100 away from you and then the next year I give you about 20 back, and I'm saying, you should be happy about that. Members, these communities are hurting. And, when you look at what Representative Runback was saying, she was talking about some of the cities that had lowered their levies. And a number of cities lowered their levies. A number of counties lowered their levies or froze their levies. In fact, if you looked at, according to nonpartisan research, total cities and counties and schools and townships, the total increase in levy was about $78 million, less than 1%. So, Representative Runbeck, you make the point that if all these cities were actually lowering levies and the total increase was only 1%, about $78 million, why did taxes statewide go up $370 million? What's the difference between those two numbers? The big difference? $260 million of the homestead credit elimination. It was the homestead credit. Nonpartisan research shows 70% of that increase was due to the homestead credit being taken away. And there's no restoration of that in the bill. And we know that hit rural Minnesota especially hard. I've talked about that before. We picked up in rural Minnesota 64% of the tab, and a homeowner in rural Minnesota saw 8 times the increase in their taxes than someone in the metro area. Businesses 3 times. There's a couple comments made about local government aid back in the 1960s. Members, today's LGA is not your father's LGA. That was a totally different situation. It was put out there pretty much by population. Now, with the current formula, 96% is on the formula. It's based on need and the ability to pay. And there was a study done by House Research and others, probably 5 or 6 years ago, that showed about 30 to 40% of local government aid equated into some sort of property tax relief. But local government aid isn't just for property tax relief, it's to be able to fund those crucial, important services that maintain our quality of life. So, members, there's the homestead credit was mentioned. They said 8 out of the 10 years we didn't pay the homestead credit. Well, in all but 2 of those years, the only cities that didn't get the full amount were those cities that didn't receive local government aid. Back when there was huge cuts back in 2003, when local government aid was taking huge cuts, the governor also looked at how in the world can we try to share the pain on those cities that don't get local government aid, so they reduced permanently local government aid to, I don't know, probably 30 cities or so that didn't get, or it might have been 100 cities that didn't get local government aid. But not until 2009, 2010 was there ever a dime cut to anyone in rural Minnesota, to a city. But there's 2 things you have to remember when they talk about we didn't fund the homestead credit for 8 of the 10 years, is that not once was there 1 dime cut to the homeowner. The homeowner received 100% of the homestead credit. So when members try to say 8 out of the 10 years, every single year the homeowner got the full benefit. And school districts never lost a dime of homestead credit. So the elimination of the homestead credit was huge. And, I must say that this came to the House floor, and I know a lot of members were not aware of a lot of cities that are going to lose money based on current law here. Much like what happened with the elimination of the homestead credit. And so, to call this a non-controversial bill is very far from the truth. Members, you're going to vote yes or no. I mean, I'm going to vote no, but, it depends on your cities and so forth. But let's face it, this has no significant property tax relief for our homeowners, not a single dime of relief for our farmers, and it doesn't restore the homestead credit, and the elimination of that is what caused this whole property tax mess in the first place. So, members, vote as you wish. I'll be voting no. Members, there's winners and losers in this bill, which is unfortunate. It didn't have to be. But we need to restore the local government aid, and we need to restore the homestead credit.
On the motion to concur, is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion? Okay, Representative Lencheski from Hennepin County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Members, if you look at the run, and it is concerning to me that we didn't receive a run, but I requested that the nonpartisan House research people prepare a run, and generally the tax chair hands those out. I don't see them on majority members' desks, so I hope your tax chair is showing you all what's happening to your cities here. Again, we've heard people tell folks, and you really probably want to look at this, but we've heard people remind a bunch of you that many of you didn't realize you were voting to eliminate the homestead credit, and there's a bunch of you losing your LGA in here now, so you might want to look up your cities. I'm certainly not, because I don't receive LGA, but I would ask all members, no matter how you're feeling about how you do on the run, to vote against the motion to concur. Because members, and I know people are waving papers over there, but you know, members, the truth is this is available because I asked for it. That's why I asked that you all receive a run. And you all should have had that, and we should have all had that. And that's why the majority is now finally seeing their own cities. So members, now you're going to get to look and see which of you are losing your LGA and which of you aren't. But all members should be voting to not concur now. Because we're watching members find out about a bill that left the Senate at 1 in the morning, where the spreadsheet was not available to the public, and the run is only in front of legislators at my request, and now the majority is receiving it at this very moment. So every member should vote to not concur. Send this back. Let's work on it correctly. Let's not have another tax disaster in the property tax system in Minnesota where legislators say, I wish somebody would have explained it to me. Please vote to not concur.
Members, any further discussion on the motion to concur? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of concurring with the Senate amendments, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. No. The motion prevails, and the clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by the Senate.
Third reading, House File 2690, as amended by the Senate.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. The member from Hennepin, Representative Simon, votes no. There being 100 ayes and 30 nays, the conference committee, the motion to concur, the bill passes as amended by the Senate. There we go. Conference committee reports. The clerk will report the conference committee report on House File 247.
Conference committee report. This is the Davids report, Conference Committee report on House File 247, an act relating to taxation. The report is addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 247, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report's signed by all three conferees on the part of the House and all three conferees on the part of the Senate.
I recognize
David's moves that the report of the Conference Committee in House File 247 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
I recognize the author, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I would request that we accept the Conference Committee report, House File 247, and what this bill does, or what this conference report does, is if you take House File 2337 and you change some of the numbers, basically mostly in the tails, and you leave all the local projects in, so for example, the Brooklyn Park or Brooklyn Center, you leave in the Rochester Mayo issues, you leave in the West St. Paul issues, you leave in the City of St. Paul with their bonding authority and so forth. If you leave that all in, then you have this bill. But what I'd like to do, of course, on a conference report is basically talk about the differences. Members of this House, during the State of the State address, I thought Governor Dayton gave a great speech. And there was something very hopeful for me in that speech when the governor said, and this is not an exact quote, but this is basically what he said he'd like to take some of his good ideas, and he'd like to take some of our good ideas, and he would like to see those basically passed for the betterment of this great state. I took him at his word on that in the State of the State. So members, House File 2337 was vetoed, and we looked very closely at the veto message. And I thought that that was a bill that could be signed. The governor didn't, and he's the governor. But we took very seriously what he said in his veto message and what he said at a news conference after the veto. And members, I would like to quote exactly what the governor said so you can see how we constructed this bill to make it so that it would be a bill that the governor would sign, because as I've said before, there are more jobs in this tax bill than in the Viking Stadium and the bonding bill combined. That's a very powerful statement and a very true statement. But our governor said, and I'll read from Friday, May 4th at the news conference regarding tails. The governor said, again, I am willing to negotiate and I am willing to compromise, but that means somewhere between zero, and they started out at 189 million. We're talking about the tails here. Halfway between 0 and 189 is not 145 million. That's the tails in House File 2337. That, as you say, just confirms the kind of problem we have in middle ground is in between the two. I'm just reading how he said it. It's not almost or entirely on one side, and I point out this is not a budget year. This is not intended to be a tax year. We did that last year, and so this weighs only triggered by success. Commissioner Jensen said this proves no good deeds go unpunished. So basically, what the governor said was that the middle of 0 to 189 is not 145 million. And, giving more tax relief I think is a good thing, and I believe too much of a good thing is a good thing, but the governor disagreed. And so the governor believes, from what he said in the press conference, that we need to be somewhere between 0 and 189. Well, I have for you today, and if I get excited, I can't help myself because this is another smoking hot tax bill. The tails members are 73 million. Try to write a tax bill sometime without tails. Pretty tough to do. So we went with his 1213 numbers of 52 million, actually a little bit less than that. We took the commercial industrial rather than getting rid of the inflators, so now we can't say that there's 2 point whatever billion, you know, that I think they had numbers going out to 2026. I'd never seen that before, going out that far with tails, but we had to make the numbers big as we could, I guess. So we get the tails down to 73 million. All the local projects are included. The bill that just passed, those issues are out of this bill. But in the conference committee, just so it's very clear to members, again, I said this is how basically House File 2337 with some adjustments on the numbers, the angel investment credits in there. I don't want to go through all the things that are still in there because we've already debated those issues. We also included the governor's, some of the governor's Department of Revenue's technical language, and there's one provision I'd like to point out that I think is very important in this conference report. The governor brought to us an issue having to do with student loans. And members, we put this in the bill, and it says that we can carry forward. Currently under federal law, you can go out 3 years. Minnesota just goes out once. So if we don't use some of the student loan money, it goes back. And I agree with the governor 100% that we should conform with the feds on this and go out 3 years. So if there's some money that's not used, we can carry it forward into the next year and the next year. And we also did that with some housing bonds. I was thinking of Representative Clark when we accepted that language because she's been such an advocate for housing over the years. So we did some good work there, and I thank the governor for the good work on the student loan provisions and on some housing issues. So with that, members, that's basically the conference report. I really appreciate your support.
Is there any discussion? The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, this is more in the nature of a point of order. Madam
State
Speaker,
your point of order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I didn't want to interrupt Representative Davids as he was speaking, but it is clearly a violation of Mason's Section 572 to refer to the executive in debate, and just about all of the speech we just heard did that. And Madam Speaker, about this time last year, I made a note of it in my book because another member on the other side of the aisle stood up and demanded of the Speaker that he stop one of the DFL members from mentioning the name of the executive. And I'm not going to do that, Madam Speaker, because really I think we should avoid interrupting members, and I don't think that we need to direct, I don't think I need to demand anything of the Speaker, but I would ask you, Madam Speaker, to admonish the body that Mason's clearly says that it is inappropriate for a member in debate to use the name of the executive for the purpose of influencing votes of the members. Because we are here to debate the merits of a bill and not whether the executive likes or dislikes that bill. So thank you, members.
Thank you for the friendly reminder, Representative Liebling. For the member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, now that we're finally on the right bill, I would just direct people back to my comments on the previous bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Loon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks for clarifying that, Representative Downey. Members, I urge us all to look again carefully at this tax bill and find it hopefully within your ability to support it. You know, it's not as much tax relief for our small businesses as I would like to see, and maybe a lot of us would like to see, but you know, getting down to the tough business of governing is honestly about compromise. And I have some concerns when we get into the tax arena about doing tax policy that is blink on, blink off. Because as we've looked at these issues, honestly, one of the things that is stilting our economic recovery is the hesitancy of businesses to go out and hire because they are waiting for government policies to change. So when we do some of these kind of herky-jerky provisions, it concerns me that we are not providing enough stability in our tax code. We're going to do it for 1 year. Who knows what's going to happen next year? But that being said, there are a couple of things in this bill that are permanent, that are directed at small business and are very important. And most importantly, they are supported by people on both sides of this aisle and other important government officials almost universally. We've all tried to work on this. The upfront sales tax exemption on capital equipment, it is something many of us have worked on for years. It's very important. It is targeted for businesses with 50 employees or less. We discussed this in the conference committee and found that in doing the estimate on this, at least 14% of our manufacturing firms in Minnesota fall under this definition of 50 employees or less. So it's at least 14% of our manufacturing companies that could basically stop lending the state of Minnesota some of their tax dollars when they buy capital equipment they need to operate their businesses and hopefully to hire some more people. So this is a good change, and it's permanent, and it's something we ought to be doing. It's something we should have done a long time ago. Budget constraints haven't allowed it. We've got a great opportunity to do that. Research and development is another one. Again, we'd like to see those credits bumped up a little bit. It's a small step from 2.5 to 2.8, but still a step in the right direction. Again, for those high-tech companies, very intensive expenses on research and that, but they yield great results in terms of good-paying jobs for our state. We've seen it in medical technology and other areas over and over again. So these are good investments in our state. Angel investment tax credit has really been a boon for fledgling businesses. It's a one-time bump in that money. I wish it was more, but again, for another year, it's going to help more small businesses get off the ground. So members, you know, you can't always get what you want, but I think we are getting something that many small businesses need with this tax bill. I think it is a good compromise. I want to thank the chair for his very hard work on this, and I hope we can all support it.
Any further discussion? The member from Hennepin, Representative Dabney.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that the House do not adopt the conference committee report, and I'd ask for a roll call.
Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The member from Hennepin, Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, you know, the representative from Eden Prairie just did a nice job of extolling the virtues of this bill. What she didn't tell you is many of the fine provisions that are in here are a lot less fine when you don't actually pay for them. It's like taking the kids out to dinner and then trying to find out where the window in the men's room is so you can sneak the family out rather than pay the bill. We've passed some of these things before, like the upfront credit sales tax on capital equipment. It's a good provision to pass. It's a better provision to pay for, because that's when it goes into law and that's when it helps out our small manufacturers. It's been passed before. It's been passed by this when this side of the aisle was in the majority and was vetoed by Governor Pawlenty. Let's do it in a way that not only helps out our small businesses by giving them that upfront credit, but is responsible fiscally to our taxpayers and doesn't add to next year's deficit. Let's look beyond November 6th to next year and the year after that and the year after that. We are playing games with the people of Minnesota. We're playing games with the small businesses of Minnesota. We're not being fiscally responsible, which is our first duty as members of this body. I ask for a yes vote on the motion not to adopt. Let's send this back to conference committee. Let's have them do some work. If the stadium folks can be meeting, so can the tax folks, and they can bring it back and get it right. Thank you.
On the motion to refuse to adopt, the member from Hennepin, Representative Lencheski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I sure hope you'll support the Dabney motion. The Dabney motion. Members, we've already done this year. This is sort of the same thing all over again. It's going to end in the same result, I think. Members, this is a bill that has a bag of goodies for a select few that we're not paying for. Now, I've been fortunate enough to serve under lots of tax chairs bipartisanly and serve on their conference committees. And there have been tax chairs in the past that have wanted to give out goodies, but they usually had to pay for them. This bill, and I can't say where it's coming from, but this has all kinds of tax preferences and subsidies that, first of all, to me, just aren't warranted. Again, you know, capitalism seems to have died in Minnesota. We have to pick winners and losers and hand out tax preferences to all kinds of wealthy folks and business owners in this bill. But worst of all, we're not going to pay for them. I think you heard Representative Dabney talking about that. I mean, and you know, we're not going to pay for them directly, but what we're going to do, members, what tax preferences do is mean all the rest of us pay a little bit more. So someone else can pay less. That's what this bill is. Every Minnesotan is going to pay a little more in taxes, so somebody else gets to pay less. That's what the whole bill does. Now you could say, well, let's cut government then, so all the Minnesotans paying taxes don't have to pay a little more. Well, now what happens is everybody pays the exact same and gets less stuff. It's a bad deal. It's not paid for. Members, a few items in this bill that we should talk about. The bill uses reserves. You know, the bill is dipping into the budget reserves to help pay for it. I have heard that we would not do extra debt and not a penny more, and we're not going to go over 34. This bill is dipping into reserves to, in part, pay for it. There's a whole bunch that's not being paid. This bill, members, also puts business tax preferences and carve-outs and special treatments ahead of school funding, ahead of paying back the school shift. This says that these special preferences, these tax expenditures, these business tax cuts are first in line. They get their goodie bag, we're not going to pay for them, and they get them ahead of paying back the school shift. This bill grows the deficit. We talked about this last time. The bill that started out grew the deficit $800 million a year when fully brought in, fully phased in. This bill doesn't go that far. It only grows the deficit $200 million in the next decade and doesn't pay for it. So again, there's a deficit. You know, I think everybody has heard the governor has said he's not going to accept tails. There's a lot of tails in this bill, $73 million in the next biennium. Representative Marquardt talked earlier. This money could have been put to bringing back the homestead credit. I mean, since you're going to give tax preferences out to a whole bunch of businesses and a whole bunch of wealthy people and not pay for it, couldn't we have brought back the homestead credit and not paid for that either? Because this would have worked. But that wasn't a priority. We're not going to help homeowners. There's no property tax relief for farmers. And there's just a little list of goodie bag here that some people like bipartisanly, but nobody pays for them. You know, members, if you look through the list of what's being handed out here, is most of them, we on this side of the aisle were the chief author of these provisions. And you're making little changes to them and tweaks or giving more money back retroactively or cutting them a little. And they were put in law by the now minority. The difference is we paid for them. Governor Pawlenty insisted if we were going to change the R&D credit or the Angel credit or whatever all we were going to do, we had paid for it. Now we have that going on here, but no one's paying for it. And it's first in line. Members, just a little bit about who are the beneficiaries in this bill that all the rest of us are paying for. Whether you want to call this keeping money in people's pockets or a tax cut or a tax increase, pick your, kind of way you want to talk about it depending on your ideology. But there is no one who would deny that the existence of these carve-outs and special preferences, tax preferences for certain taxpayers in Minnesota makes all the rest of us either pay more or get less, and most likely pay more and get less. So that's what's going on here. So who are these people? The investors that qualify for one of the provisions in this bill, members, have to be accredited by the SEC, which means their net worth has to be more than $1 million, and as a couple they have to make a minimum of $300,000 a year. That's in this bill. We have a deficit coming up next year that we don't know how we're going to pay for. Last year's legislature had to sell tobacco bonds rather than find money. and grow the school shift. And now we still don't have money. We haven't solved that. We have a deficit coming at us, a $2.4 billion school shift to pay for, and we're going to hand out tax preferences to folks who have to earn at least $300,000 to qualify. And we all get to pay for that, all of us here in this room, because we're all going to pay a little more and get a little less. Our government is getting more expensive for all of us, so some people don't have to pay as much in taxes. We're going to have refundable credits in here to millionaires. If you doubt it, I can direct you to the page. There are refundable tax credits in this bill for millionaires. Not for people on food stamps, not for people in poverty, for millionaires. That's what's in this bill. You know, even the way many of these items are constructed, members, could have been done so much more efficiently. But instead we've got the credits working in a way that only a select few are going to benefit. They're going to gobble up everybody else's taxes rather than having a lot of folks get a little bit. We're just going to have a few big dogs take up all the R&D credit quickly. On the CI statewide levy freeze, members, this is, I think, the banner piece that I've heard the majority call the jobs part of the bill. And members, all that does is says, if you have a business in Minnesota of any size, whether you're the Mall of America, you're a gas station, you're a Super Value, you're a barber shop, we're just going to give you a tax cut that everybody else is going to pay for. You don't have to do anything to get it. You don't have to hire a single person. There's nothing you have to do to get that tax cut. Everyone else gets to pay a little higher taxes so you can have that tax cut. And oh, by the way, we're not going to pay for it. We are not going to pay for it. We're just going to run it out into the future so some other folks have to pay for it. This is the height of fiscal irresponsibility, members. You all know it. We all know it. We know it. You know, I could do, if this were a real bill, not a conference committee report, I could just do an amendment to take the same $200 million that no one's going to pay for in the future and just cut the income tax. And then just say, I just gave an income tax to everybody, tax cut in Minnesota. The truth is, we'd all know that would be phony because we wouldn't have paid for it, so everybody would have to pay higher taxes to pay for the tax cut. Come on. You know that's what's going on here. Now, I don't doubt that some folks really believe that if we give out a whole bunch of money to a whole bunch of people, whether they should get it or not, whether they create a job or not, that something good will happen. You know, we can be a lot more efficient than that, members. There are so many things wrong with business taxes in this state. And to pick the one that is the most stable in good times and bad, that is arguably the simplest and fairest, and not touch getting rid of the corporate tax or all the other volatile, inane business taxes we have, we're going to take the one that everyone can rely on, that everyone understands, that every resident in every city, whether they live in Richfield or Zumbrota, thinks that the business in their community should pay taxes. But instead we're going to say, you know what, you need a property tax cut more than everybody else. We took away everybody's homestead credit, we cut LGA in the last bill and last year, and now we're going to give, with money we don't have, a business tax cut, and you don't have to do anything to get it. Now, I've watched people say, but you know what, businesses have to pay their property taxes whether they make money or not. Is there a homeowner who doesn't have that situation? What constituent do you all represent that if they lose their job, the government says you don't have to pay your property taxes? Nobody gets that preferential treatment. If a business doesn't make money, that's right, it pays its property taxes. And if a homeowner doesn't have a job or make money that year, they pay their property taxes. No one's stepping in to say to them, you know, things might be rough for you, here's a property tax cut. No, you get a property tax increase. That's what's happened to homeowners. So, you know, members, this is a bill full of tax preferences for a select few. We don't have the money for it. It grows the deficit. It hasn't addressed any of the reasons the last bill was vetoed. Folks can go back and look at the last bill and then read the veto letter and ask yourself, what's changed? This is just a little bit smaller. You know, members, if we had this kind of money laying around, and we don't, we have a deficit staring us in the face. We have to pay back our schools. We've already done tobacco bonds. But if we had some money laying around, really? Is this really who we think should be first in line? Really? Every gas station in Minnesota needs a tax cut first. Every grocery store needs a tax cut first. Every warehouse needs a tax cut first. Every dog groomer needs a tax cut first. Everybody, I mean, everybody is all equal. It just happens to be a business, so you all just get a tax cut? We could do so much better than this. We could look at taxes that are actually harming us competitively, keeping businesses from coming here. Instead, we're going to hand out tax cuts to people who are already here, not based on anything. And that wouldn't matter if we had billions of money lying around. We could do things really inefficiently, but we don't have that kind of money lying around. So we need to be strategic and surgical and targeted, as the governor was in his bill. He proposed limited, measured, targeted relief for businesses who, first and foremost, created a job. That's not going on in here. It's tax relief we can't afford for, not for homeowners, not for renters, and a bunch of tax preferences for very, very wealthy Minnesotans. Please support the Dabney motion.
The member from Clay, Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members, and I rise in support of the motion to refuse to adopt. Members, Governor Dayton and the House DFL have been very loud and clear. No new deficits. No more piling debt onto the backs of our senior citizens and our families and our farmers and our children and our businesses. And members, next biennium, we're looking at a $1.1 billion deficit. $1.1 billion deficit. And then you add on to that the $2.4 billion we still owe our students and our schools. A total of $3.5 billion deficit just into the next biennium, and this bill will add another $73 million. That is fiscally irresponsible. We can't go down that path, and Representative Lincheski talked about all the reasons why and the impact that has. Again, this bill, it's what it doesn't have in it. There's no restoration of the homestead credit. The main reason why we had huge property tax increases this last year throughout the state, the elimination of the homestead credit, there's no restoration of bringing that back to our homeowners. Bringing back that benefit that homeowners had enjoyed for over 4 decades. And members, there's no balance. All of the relief goes to business. And yet, not one dime of relief for our homeowners, not one dime of relief for our farmers, a $15 billion economy in this state, not one dime of property tax relief. And yet when you look at the last 10 years, you know who has seen the huge increases in property taxes? Homeowners in this state have seen their property taxes double. Farmers have seen their property taxes go up 150% the last 10 years, and businesses about 54%. And so, how can we have a bill before us when you have homeowners having huge property tax increases, farmers having huge property tax increases, and nothing for property tax relief for those folks, and yet relief for businesses? And we know that probably the best thing we can do to get this economy going and get businesses flourishing is build a stronger middle class. You know, when your senior citizens are stronger and your families are stronger and your farmers are stronger, our state is stronger, our economy is stronger, and our businesses are better. That's the recipe. So, members, this is fiscally irresponsible, does not restore the homestead credit, and there's no balance, no relief to those folks who need it the most. Please adopt the motion to refuse to adopt.
On the motion to refuse to adopt, any other discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson, votes aye. From no to aye. There being 56 yeas and 72 nays, or excuse me, yes, 72 nays, the motion does not prevail. Members, we are on the motion to adopt the conference committee report. Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Yes, to adopt. I apologize. All those in favor of adopting the conference committee report, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. No. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, House File 247 as amended by conference.
Third reading. Any further discussion? The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, members, it's extraordinary to me that here we sit once again on the floor castigating rich millionaires, people with lots of money. Oh my gosh, they own a business. They put money into the business. They create jobs. Their own blood, sweat, and tears, their own investment, their own risk, their own capital. They're creating jobs, sustainable jobs in Minnesota, members, not by taking money out of someone else's pocket through taxes and then buying jobs through a project that has a beginning and an end date, but by actually putting their life work on the line, creating jobs. And here we are talking about, and again, I know the numbers, the words must pull real well, members. You can hear it now, election year politics, corporations and wealthy people. That pulls well because we really don't want any of them to have any benefit because, of course, none of us are the wealthy or the corporations. But as I said before on this floor, members, these are the geese that lay the golden eggs for Minnesota, that pay the majority of the taxes, that create the majority of the jobs. Members, this bill is chock full of benefit for Minnesota's small employers, medium-sized employers, not the big, wealthy people that you want to go after, who invest in jobs. What a terrible thing. These people take their money and invest in creating jobs and boosting our economy and making the Minnesota economic engine run so we have the revenue to take care of people in need. What a terrible thing. But here on this House floor, that's what we hear over and over and over again from the left. Beat up on the job creators, beat up on Main Street businesses because it sounds good, it polls well. Members, this tax bill does a great job for Minnesota's job creators. I asked before on the floor, do you mean it? Are you really interested in creating jobs or just creating campaign banners? So let's look at this. The automatic inflator, which drives businesses nuts, small, medium, and large-sized businesses, automatic inflation in their taxes is frozen for 1 year, not forever, for 1 year, a little relief, so they can invest in their businesses and create more jobs across the state. Across the state, members.
But you used the new title?
A tax credit to hire an unemployed veteran. A tax credit for businesses to hire unemployed veterans. Sounds like a good thing to me. How about you? Are you willing to vote for it or aren't you? It's in this bill. An upfront sales tax exemption. Instead of sending the money to St. Paul and asking for it back, oh please, politicians in St. Paul, please give me a little of my money back so I'm not being taxed twice on the things I'm purchasing to invest in my business and create jobs. No, we're leaving it in their pockets. It's a tax exemption. And who's it for? Big, wealthy corporations? No, it's for companies with less than 51 employees. Small businesses, members. Real tax relief up front for growing jobs in Minnesota for small Minnesota employers, Main Street businesses, Main Street workers. That's in this bill. What a terrible thing. We increased the production limit for small brewers. A few more extra jobs here and there for Minnesotans, a good thing. These are small employers again. Members, small employers create 80% of the new jobs. And that's where this relief is targeted. But no, we want to use the words wealthy and corporation because they poll well and make people feel like all we're doing is helping somebody who's making off with our money. Unbelievable. Unbelievable, members, that we can sit here and do that to the job creators in the state of Minnesota. And we wonder why they're leaving. Wonder why they're taking their jobs elsewhere. Wonder why our neighboring states are succeeding in pulling businesses away from us. There's a grant for a Greater Minnesota Internship Program helping people connect their education with jobs. What a terrible thing. That's in this bill, members. Sales tax exemption for data centers. Minnesota has been a center for this kind of job creation, providing a little tax relief so they can keep and grow jobs right here in Minnesota. We say we're about job creation. We say it's our top priority. Here's a bill, members, that creates more jobs than the bonding bill and the Viking Stadium. And you voted for those things because you like jobs. That's what you said. Well, if you like jobs, here is a great job creation bill. And it does it by leaving some monies in the pockets of the job creators who have told us in town hall meeting, in cafe chat, in meetings all across this state, what do you need to grow jobs, businesses, small town businesses, union and non-union employers? What do you need to grow jobs? Get off our backs, get out of our pockets. A little tax relief, a little regulatory relief to create thousands of sustainable jobs that don't depend on taxing somebody else, but give some credit where credit is due for people who put their own blood, sweat, and tears every day into creating jobs in every town across this state. I'm not going to go on, members. There's a long list of things that are in this bill that are very, very good for our Main Street businesses, our job creators, and our workers. And to sit here on the House floor and to listen to people castigate it for providing a little bit of relief where relief is due to businesses and job creators in this state is just shocking. You want to keep driving them out of Minnesota, you want to keep heaping burdens on them, you want to keep calling them names on the House floor, they will take their jobs and their investments elsewhere. I guarantee it. So let's stop playing party politics with our job creators and stand behind a bill that helps us create real jobs all over the state of Minnesota. I urge a green vote.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Gottwald yield to a question?
He yields. Representative Winkler.
Representative Gottwald, how do you know that Minnesota is the best place to have data centers and the market doesn't know that?
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald.
Madam Speaker, Representative Winkler, this may turn into another one of your back and forths which suggests somehow, maybe Minnesota is a great place to do business. Maybe that's where you're going with it. Members, I happen to know from my background in economic development that a lot of data centers have located here. They create thousands of jobs in Minnesota. And the point in this bill, Representative Winkler and members, if you want to support it, go ahead. because it provides a little help to them so they can create more of those jobs. Now, in my mind, that's a good thing. So we can have another 10, 15-minute back and forth where we get at some point about how Minnesota is either already a great place and doesn't need any help, or some other point that you're going to try to make about why this bill doesn't work, Representative Winkler. But it's really a straightforward bill, members, providing a little relief for our job creators, whether they be data centers, Main Street businesses, small brewers, thousands and thousands of jobs in this bill. I'd be a green vote if I were you, Representative Winkler. Just my suggestion.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Representative Gavel, that's what people don't like about politicians. They never answer the questions. The question is, how do you know better than the market about whether Minnesota should be a place for data centers? And what you should have said is, I don't know. Because if you believe in the free market, you believe that the free market is the best place to decide where to invest money for maximum economic return. And if we've had data centers in Minnesota before we passed a special sales exemption last year, we'll have data centers in the future whether it's there or not, and they don't need to be given more free money. Representative Gruenhagen, a couple nights ago during the Vikings debate, I stood up and opposed an amendment from Representative Atkins because the state was going to be creating a loan program for people to go out and buy the e-pull tab machines. And I said, why are we subsidizing these businesses to be able to go invest? And I wonder if you realize that in this bill that I'm going to guess, going to vote for, we have this angel investor credit. It's a bill that a version of which I carried at one point, but apparently it's not working very well, because now there's new language in here that is requiring the state of Minnesota to spend money to market a tax credit in greater Minnesota. So it's not good enough that we have to tell the market where it should allocate its resources, and we have to create a credit in order to get people, rich people, Representative Gottwald, I know some of these people, and I work for them actually, to invest in these startup companies. It's not enough that we have to have the government weigh in and create this credit to get people to put their money in those kind of businesses. It's not working, so now the government needs to market its tax credits to people. That's the kind of mentality that is tied up in this bill. The idea is that politicians in St. Paul know better how to allocate scarce resources than the free market does. Members, if you believe in innovation, Representative Bloom, you talk about innovation a lot. If you believe in innovation, you should want no exemptions to the tax code. You should want it to be the corporate tax to be absolutely flat, no exemptions. Because then the market can decide what is innovative. The market can decide where resources should go to new ideas, new process, new techniques that will actually improve our economy. It isn't small business per se that creates jobs in a mature economy like Minnesota's. It's innovation that creates jobs. Innovation creates jobs because it attracts capital, because it makes more money. And so if you want innovation in Minnesota, you should try to reduce the complexity of the business tax code rather than have politicians in the Minnesota House of Representatives, most of whom, by the way, have no idea how innovative businesses actually work because they've never worked in them. Most of them have no idea. Come in with an opinion to talk about, oh, I think this credit will make things more innovative, or we give this gift to this business and they're going to create jobs because they'll find some better way to do it. The fact of the matter is the market is far better at figuring out what is innovative and what is new than all of us sitting in this room. So that's the kind of concept that this tax bill contains. The whole concept. If you don't like politicians in St. Paul dictating, you should vote no. Because this bill is filled with politicians in St. Paul deciding what kind of businesses should win and what kind of businesses should lose, and it's totally contrary to any idea that Minnesota should be an innovation state. We didn't get to be an innovation state through tax credits. Furthermore, the only way that you're going to be able to capture innovation is by having educated people. Representative Garofalo, I'm sure you're going to vote for this bill. It takes $28 million away from the school kids in Minnesota. $28 million away that would otherwise be going to them because of excess revenue that's coming in right now. It would go first to paying back the money that we owe them. $28 million. So think of it this way. Instead of putting $28 million towards a kid's education, you're going to put $28 million into your own ideas for how to best grow businesses. your own ideas about what's innovative, your own ideas about what the future economy looks like in Minnesota. And I got to tell you, we're not very good at that. In the early 1980s, if you'd put money on the table to most politicians in Minnesota and they said, should Minnesota be the home of supercomputers or should Minnesota be the home of national retail? Everybody would have said, supercomputers, that's the way of the future. Nobody would have thought that big retail companies like Target and Best Buy would be at the top of our Fortune 500 list. We're not good at predicting the future in a true market economy. That's why we should be voting against bills like this. We should vote against bills like this because it does nothing to spur innovation. This particular bill actually takes money from education, which is essential to being an innovative economy. And finally, members, I'm not going to belabor the property tax point, but if you want to put money into people's pockets to spend, you might create jobs because those people are going to spend it in the economy. They're going to create demand. They're going to create orders for businesses. The problem in our economy is not that major corporations like Target don't have enough money. We have record corporate profits. A lot of that corporate profit record comes because they're very good at selling things all over the world now. But what we're really lacking is a strong middle-class demand. And so a tax bill that gives big corporations like Target huge commercial industrial tax breaks, it's big money to us. It could be significant money to individuals and homeowners, but it's nothing to them. They couldn't even find it. Talk about a rounding error, Representative Davids. Target won't even know if the money came or not. They won't even be able to find it if they look for it. It does nothing for them. What we are doing is taking money out of education. We are choosing our own personal ideas about what will create jobs and what won't. And then, instead of giving property tax relief to people who will actually spend it in the economy and create demand, we're giving property tax relief to major corporations who don't need the money and won't spend it anyway because they don't have customers. That's the problem with our economy. This tax bill does nothing to fix any of those things. It's the same failed concept that government knows best about how to spend, about how to create jobs. It's the same failed concept that government knows best about which businesses to favor, and it's the same failed concept that if you continue to throw money at big corporations and hope for the best, what you're going to get is not very much.
Any further discussion? The member from Hennepin, Representative Depke.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that. Well, you know, the comment was just made that politicians shouldn't be picking and choosing winners, and that very few people in the legislature have any kind of a business background and they should just kind of stay out of it. Well, I have to tell you that there are so many provisions in this bill, and I'm going to repeat them again, that came out of the Small Business Bipartisan Caucus that I was very proud to be part of. And I don't believe that Representative Winkler was a part of that Small Business Caucus. And I will tell you that as on a bipartisan basis, many of us conducted interviews all around the state in our small business communities. I know that I was involved in 4 of these meetings, and we had bipartisan support. And we listened to those businesses. We listened. This legislation wasn't just put together by a bunch of people that don't understand business. It was put together by the small business community themselves. And I'm going to just reiterate to you a couple of the things that Representative Loon already said, that it was very important to these small businesses. And by the way, I've spent 25 years in business, in small businesses, and I've worked hard with the small business community, so I'm an insider, guys, and I just wanted you to know that. That upfront capital equipment has been something that our chambers have been asking for in our small business community for years. We are finally getting to the point where businesses with 50 people or less in them get some upfront tax relief, and it's called cash flow. The next one is our R&D credit. Would they like a little bit more than the 0.3% we're going to give them? Sure. But they are willing and able and desperately want this R&D credit. Representative Winkler talked about how we need innovation. And even though it's a small percent, they want that. Even our small businesses want to be able to reinvest in their companies to grow. The other is the one-year investment in the angel tax credit. I can't tell you how important this has been. We heard in these small business meetings how that little bit of investment to get them started in this kind of economy and how important it was. And it is going to be something that's going to help these businesses. And then finally, the elimination of the current tax exemption. We could not afford to take the June accelerated tax. And that was the one thing that one of my colleagues, Representative Ward, and I were very excited about and were hoping we could do, but we could not afford to do that because of the tails. But we have put in this bill every other month except the June accelerated payment. This is important. These provisions are important for our small business community and we know that because they were generated from the small businesses themselves. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Reinert. I got it.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, both for acknowledging me and remembering my county. Thank you. I would like to just comment briefly on Representative Depke's remarks because I did serve on the Small Business Caucus and I support many of the provisions that we arrived at as a bipartisan group. However, as Representative Downey indicated earlier, our intention was that those provisions would travel separately and on their own merits be voted on, and that we would figure out how to pay for them. And while I strongly support several of those provisions, I do not support this tax bill because of the tails that are involved here and the other much more controversial issues, and I think it's a shame we have to choose between those provisions in this vote. But I ask members to consider carefully the complexities of this bill and not be motivated by that bipartisan work group to support the bill. Thank you.
The member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. Representative Winkler, I just wanted to respond quickly to your comments. I actually agree with you, Representative Winkler. I'd like to see a completely simplified tax code like the fair tax and do away with our convoluted special loopholes and exemptions, and let's go with something that treats citizens and businesses equally. And so I agree with you. I don't really like doing what we're doing here, okay? But when you have the type of convoluted and punitive tax code on our small businesses that we do, something like this tries to help them get around some of the disincentives we have in our current tax code in order to create some new jobs in our economy. I'd also appreciate, so I find myself agreeing with your comments. I'd sure appreciate that same speech when the stadium bill comes up later on, Representative Winkler. Okay, I think it would fit very nicely. So, anyway, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Benson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Listening to Representative Depke, I agree with her, and I see nothing difficult about accepting the provisions of this tax bill. My only problem is that I have the same one Representative Reinert has, and that is how are we going to pay for it? All the discussions about who is for or against the wealthy or business, I don't find those arguments convincing. That's not an issue that we need to concern ourselves with. You know, I've been here several years now, and I notice that it's very easy to be brave and suggest we're going to do cuts in taxes for people. The problem then comes how we're going to pay for it. And I don't see anything in this proposal indicating how we pay for this bill. There are huge tails involved, and we're already sitting at $3.5 billion shortfall. This is going to add many millions more. And Madam Chair, Madam Speaker, I remember, as a child in my home, my mother always made wonderful dinners, but my brothers and I always had to eat our vegetables and the regular meal first before we could have dessert. My mother always made a dessert, but it was off limits until we did what we had to do first. And if the author and supporters of this bill would simply outline to me what they propose to cut to pay for the bill, I think I'd be amenable to supporting it. But to run up more deficit, this is what we've been watching going on in Washington, D.C. Politicians show that they're very brave. I'm a brave person. I'm going to cut your taxes. It's not going to cost you anything. You're not going to lose any of the benefits you're getting. You'll still get all the services. Everything else you get, except I found a way to give you a tax cut. That's led us to $14 trillion national deficit. So we're going down the same road here. It's only $3.5 billion at this point. Back in 2001, there were huge tax cuts with no way to pay for it, and the state took over the school financing, found out they didn't have the money to do it, so we have this structural deficit. It's been going on now for 15 years. So here we have another proposal before Election Day saying, vote for me, I'm being brave, I'm going to give you a tax cut. Don't worry, we'll come back and figure out a way to pay for it later. No, ladies and gentlemen, you've got to come up with a way to pay for the tax cut before you can give one. But as far as the quality of the tax cut and the provisions, they're perfectly fine. I support all those. But you've got to show me how to pay for it. So all this debate about who's for business and who's against the job creators and all that, that's a superfluous debate. The question is, how do we pay for what we want? When people come to me in my district and they ask me for this or something else, I always ask them, are you willing to pay for it? Or can you pay for it? And the answer is no, they can't. I tell them, then you don't get it. That's the way I run my personal life. That's the way we ought to run the state. Are there ways we could do some cuts in the state budget? Absolutely. Just show them to me ahead of time. Don't show me the dessert without showing me the vegetables we all have to eat. That's the issue here. So Representative Debke, I support all the reductions and the proposals for helping our business, especially small business. I have no problem with that. But Representative Breinert is correct. We have to find a way to pay for it. And to come back here next January and claim now we're going to do the right thing and pay, no. With the history of this state and the history of our federal government, we do the cuts first, and then we give the tax cuts. Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I cannot support another bill that's fiscally irresponsible.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
You know, this bill has an awful lot of things I like in it. It's got the angel investment tax credit. Kind of know that bill. I think I carried it 3 years ago. I carried a version of the research and development credit increase 3 years ago. The historic tax credit to repair old buildings rather than build new ones. Well, I'm not that good with that one. The Veterans Jobs Credit, carried that bill this year. The $7 million appropriation to the Minnesota Investment Fund, carried that bill this year, and I want to thank the chair. That's to change it from $3 million, which I think I had in the bill, $2 million to $7 million, and a couple of the other parts where you saved the Science and Technology Authority in this bill. It's really hard for me to say this, but when we raid a budget reserve and we grow the deficit, it becomes really difficult to vote for this bill. We've been doing things for small businesses for a long time. It is a jobs engine, small businesses, and we've been trying. But we can't be irresponsible with our budgets, with our dollars. And members, as much as I really, really want to vote for this, because it's got like 5 or 6 items in here, and it's got a provision for St. Paul. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's got 6 or 7 issues in here that I think are good issues for small businesses. I don't know that it creates more jobs than a bonding bill or a stadium. I think it creates the environment for more innovation. I think it does a lot of good things. But when you start acting like the federal government, that's when we get into trouble long term. The federal government has been doing strange accounting for many, many, many years. And the trust level in D.C. by the rest of the country is pretty low. I think they're at 17%. And if we start down that road, doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're sitting on, I don't want to have people, only 17% of the population trust me. I understand Representative Benson's idea of cutting first. And we've made tough choices. Across both sides of the aisle, we've made tough choices over the last 10 years. And we should be able to do it again. But we cannot do good things and then pay for them with money we don't have. I hope we don't vote for this bill.
Any further discussion? The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Members, we started out this session where we picked up from last session. We had a very difficult session in 2011. We had a $5.5 billion budget deficit facing us down. We had a fundamental difference of opinion as to how to deal with that, whether or not to raise taxes. That was a very defining discussion. It was one that was painful. It was one that led to right up into and beyond the limits of our session, and unfortunately even a shutdown. And in resolving that, we had to make some compromises on one side of the aisle and on the other side of the aisle for no new taxes, but perhaps some additional revenue. That was difficult. You had to disappoint some people. We had to disappoint some people in doing that. It was very difficult, but we moved on and we've satisfied that budget deficit. We now have a budget surplus. We traveled the state in the interim and we said, what is our number one priority? The governor traveled the state. We all went home to our districts. We all came back. We agreed. We said jobs. Number one priority is jobs. Number one priority is jobs for this session. And the governor said, let's bring our ideas together. You bring your ideas together. We'll bring our ideas together for jobs. Let's put them together. Jobs for the governor, and I'm going to apologize because I'm going to reference the governor a few times, Representative Liebling, but it's not to be critical or pejorative, but it's in the discussion of how we can move forward, because our job here is to find bills that we can agree to that he can sign. That's our job. So it is within that frame that I would like to talk about that, because that's how we began our session. We had a reform agenda that said we need to do some things a little bit differently. We need to cut red tape for job providers, for small businesses, and for big businesses all across the state of Minnesota to get people working. We want to improve the regulatory climate. We want to lower taxes for companies that provide jobs so that they don't get provided in Wisconsin, Iowa, South Dakota, or the great state of North Dakota. We needed to do that. We needed to be competitive. That's what we said we were going to do. Now, we had a fundamental difference of opinion. On your side of the aisle, jobs meant a bonding bill, a stadium, putting people to work. We understand that. And from our side of the aisle, you say, well, that's just borrowing. You can't put dollars on a credit card, that doesn't equal jobs. A construction job doesn't last for a very long time, so you can't count that as a job. That's what the talking points were on our side of the aisle. They're not quite fair. Because I understand that in our economy today, we have a recession. In construction trades, we have a depression. We need to get people off the bench. We understand that. We had a fundamental difference of opinion of just what it meant to create jobs. But you know what? On our side of the aisle, we also said we understand that we do need infrastructure growth across the state of Minnesota, and we do need a bonding bill that addresses that. We said we can find common ground. We found common ground and worked towards a bonding bill, Representative Howes, Representative Hausman, and others, where we could compromise. We could find that. We could do that. We could move forward. We could find a little bit of common ground. But what about the other areas? What about the other areas? We looked at the areas of lawsuit reform because businesses said it's more expensive here than other places because we get sued too much, our insurance is too high, can you help us out a little bit? That was vetoed. Our attempts for mandate relief were vetoed. Our attempts to get government reform really underway that would enhance and speed up the speed of businesses so that we could compete better with permitting, with other regulatory burdens that our job providers had, that was vetoed. But we didn't give up. We persisted. We have a tax bill. Chairman Davids put together a smoking hot tax bill that the governor should have signed. Should have signed. Sizzling hot. Really good tax bill. Jobs all across the state of Minnesota. People said, well, why aren't we signing that tax bill? Chamber of Commerce, business partnership, small business, big business, medium business all across the state of Minnesota. And we said, well, we can't really afford that right now. We're sorry. We're sorry. We can't afford that right now. And then we said, well, let's work on that a little bit. What could we afford? Could you afford maybe half of that? Well, no. Sorry. Well, that creates tails. We can't do that. Well, what about half the tail? What if we cut that tail in half? Could we afford that? Could we afford just a little bit? How about one job? Could we have one job? Could we save one job? How about $1 in tax relief? Is that what we passed this year? Not $1. We couldn't afford it. We couldn't come together with $1 of tax relief for job providers in the state of Minnesota. Not $1. Nothing. Nothing. So we just put forward a bill that provided the absolute minimum. And it was non-controversial. I couldn't believe that some folks voted against it, but they did anyway. So my question really is, we might disagree about how many jobs a bonding bill might create for how long on a construction site. A $1 billion bonding bill creates 10,000 jobs or 20,000 jobs or 5,000 jobs. Or if the Mall of America project will be 700 jobs at a time for this many years. But you know what? It does have an impact in the construction trades, and it's a magnifying impact. We can agree to that. We can disagree on the numbers and the metrics. But you know what? It has an impact. But you know what? So does this. So does this. This has a real impact. So don't pretend it doesn't. Don't find an excuse. And what's the other excuse we heard this year? Well, this is all tied to the bonding bill and tax bill. They're all tied together. We can't hold the stadium hostage. Well, you know what? They're not hostage anymore. They're not hostage anymore. All three bills, they could be going to the governor separately. He can sign them one at a time. Doesn't have to sign any of them. That's his prerogative. But I hope he signs this bill. I hope he signs this bill. Because people across the state of Minnesota are hungry for work. They're hungry for compromise. And they're hungry for us to get our work done. They're ready. Members, this is a good piece of legislation that Representative Davids has put together. You know what, Representative Winkler, I agree with a lot of your speech. You talked about how we pick winners and losers, and I wish we could just treat everybody the same. I wish we could just cut the rate across the board because our taxes are too high. But you know what? We know that we couldn't get that passed. There might not be agreement to do that with the governor. We understand that, so we didn't do that. We said, what can we find that the governor can sign? Representative Davids did a great job in that. This improves it a step forward. There is really no more excuses to not provide some job relief, some tax relief to the state of Minnesota, to families, hardworking families, and the good people who sign their paychecks. Please, let's think about them just this once. Please give us a green vote.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I apologize, I was not on the floor, Representative Dean, before you went. So members, I would urge us to vote no on this bill. And it's a theme that has been sounded really for the last 16 months since we've been in session. And as we're getting close to wrapping it up, two things. The problem with this bill is it was once again designed by Republicans. There was no input from the Democrats in designing this bill. It was put in a conference committee that had 3 Republican conferees, no negotiation, no input from the governor's office. I don't believe the governor's office was even called at the conference committee to come up to the table to respond. And once again, and the other problem is that bill is once again out of balance. It's making corporations, it's making big businesses largely the priority. And we talk about creating jobs. Well, the reality is in this bill that Representative Davids is proposing, a business in Wilmer that owns a $150,000 property, they're going to get $27. I don't think that's going to keep that business from going out of business or staying in business. That is certainly not going to allow $27 a year. Certainly not going to allow that business to hire someone new. That's kind of the fallacy of what you're talking about with this bill, because those are the real numbers we're talking about and that Minnesotans ought to be paying attention to. So it's great for you to say, you know, this is this theory that we have that just turning money over to these businesses is going to somehow create a job. It's not. $27 is not going to get anybody in Wilmer hired. And that's true if you're looking in Minnetonka. If you own a $1 million property in Minnetonka, what this bill is going to get you maybe is $230 a year. Again, that's not going to keep that business from going out of business or staying in business. That's not going to allow that business to hire a new worker. That's what we're talking about. But on the other side of the equation, what you're doing in this bill is making the $1.1 billion plus several billion school shift that we have to deal with next year a couple $100 million worse. So you're getting no real benefit, you're creating no real jobs on one side, and you're just making our problems in the future worse. That's what's going on in this bill, and that honestly is what we've been doing for 16 months. I mean, if you look back to the shutdown last year and the budget that was passed to end that shutdown, you know, there's a lot of talk about, oh, well, we turned this thing around from the Republican side of the aisle. In fact, we're almost in exactly the same spot we were when we came into this building in January 2011. We have a $1.1 billion deficit on the books. If you count inflation, that goes up by another $1 billion. Plus, we have $2.5 billion of a school shift to repay. So we're already well over $4 billion. And, you know, you can quibble that we came in with $6 billion, but when the February forecast came out in 2011, you know that it was about $4.6 billion. So where we are is really no better than when we left. And that's the reality we got to be facing. But what we did was we deficit spent for the first time in state history. We made devastating cuts to higher education, the biggest in state history, and to health care, and to all of these other things. So when we talk about giving this money to corporations, instead of repaying our schools, or instead of making other investments, instead of starting down the path of actually getting our budget in a stable condition, I think that is the frustration you're hearing from our side of the aisle. We can do better than a bill like this. we could actually make some real investments that don't create these long-term deficits, but could create some jobs today. But you chose not to do that. And so, members, I would urge you to vote no once again on this tax bill, which is really no different than any tax bill that's been sent through. You keep shrinking it and shrinking it and shrinking it, but you don't solve the fundamental problem of siding always on the side of corporations and rarely, or if ever, on the side of middle-class Minnesotans, and creating deficits, spending money that you can't pay for into the future, which just makes the big challenge that we face once again next year all the worse. And so, members, we ought to be voting no on this bill. And when we come back next January, regardless of who's in charge, I hope that what we can do is actually focus on real job creation in this state. And I hope that what we can do is actually, once and for all, solve the budget crisis that we haven't seemed to have been able to figure out. Because until we do that, members, we're going to keep struggling in kind of an unreal world instead of the reality that Minnesotans want us to be dealing with. And we've spent 16 months living in an unreal world. It's time to get real. It's time to vote no, and it's time to actually get, hopefully next January, start getting our work done.
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and members, to wrap it up here, first of all, with the comments I just heard from my good friend, the Minority Leader, I have no clue what tax bill he's talking about, because it certainly was not this one. And as far as meeting with the governor, I have had 3 meetings that were supposed to be with the governor, and the governor didn't show up. I had a meeting with the governor yesterday, no show. I had a meeting with the governor last Friday, no show. And I had another meeting with he didn't show up for that one either. So to suggest that we didn't try to get together to talk about this bill with my good friend who lives in a real fancy house on Summit Avenue, that is factually incorrect. Members, to say that there is no input from my good friends on my side of the aisle is nonsense. That is simply nonsense. Representative Nelson, did you feel like you had some input with your bill that we heard on Brooklyn Park? I hope so. Representative Mahoney, holy smokes, you made out like a bandit with boatloads. Representative Atkins, great provision on the IRAs. That needs to be done. It really needs to be done. That was a good idea. Representative Slowick, you had some pretty good input. You did a great job for Oakdale. You really did. It's in the bill. Representative Liebling and Norton, Uncle Greg took care of Mother Mayo in a very fine fashion. Because after my quadruple bypass surgery, I tell you, Mother Mayo took good care of me. And some of you wish they hadn't taken such good care of me. Representative Hansen, I won't say any baby stuff or anything like that. Is it West St. Paul or South St. Paul or something like that? In the bill. It's there. My good friend from up north, Representative Dill, you have a very important provision in here for your hospital and ambulance service. It's in the bill. So to hear comments with no DFL input, I guess he just read the wrong bill. Minnesota Investment Fund. And members, look at the bill as it left this body. And look at the bill today. We made every effort to make this a bill that the governor could sign. There's no reason the governor shouldn't sign this bill. And when my good friend, the governor, says he wants to meet us halfway, we did. We did. So if you want to vote no against student loans, job credits for veterans, a bigger job bill than the stadium and the bonding bill combined, that's up to you. But I'm voting yes for this smoking hot tax bill. Vote green.
Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 73 ayes and 56 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to. If there is no objection, we'd like to revert to messages from the Senate. Seeing no objections, the clerk will report the message.
Message from the Senate. This is a Sanders motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 1653, an act relating to labor and industry. Conference Committee report is addressed to the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate, the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File 1653, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all three conferees on the part of the Senate and all three conferees on the part of the House. Sanders moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 1653 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
I recognize the author, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. After several energizing hours of tax debate, we're ready to rock and roll on Senate File 1653 Conference Committee report. This bill got a little bit better, in my opinion, from when it left the House floor. We added the 2% withholding exemption from the Senate language. Otherwise, the rest of it was the House position in the bill, as well as we added the Lemure Senate File 1717, which passed off the floor 128-0, which was a Dolly technical bill. This bill originally passed off the House floor with 118 votes, a strong bipartisan vote. And again, with the, adding the 2% withholding elimination, we feel like this bill got better, and I ask for member support.
Is there discussion of the Conference Committee report? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on Senate File 1653, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File 1653 as amended by conference.
Third reading as amended by conference. Any further discussion? The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as the author said, this bill got off the floor and came back better. I mean, originally this was part of another bill that went to the governor, got vetoed over ban on sprinklers statewide, on residential sprinklers. That provision is not in this bill. The rest of the bill is good stuff. Please vote green.
Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 116 ayes and 13 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to.
Message from the Senate. This is the Creasel motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to Senate File 1856, an act relating to lawful gambling. The Senate respectfully requests that a conference committee be appointed thereon. Senate conferees Rosen, Ingebrigtsen, and Reinhardt.
Creasel
moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate, that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate on the disagreeing votes of the 2 houses.
I recognize the author, Representative Kriesel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Senate did not respectfully ask for anything, so there's some differences to work out, and I'd ask for your support.
Discussion. There being no discussion, all those in favor in the motion to adopt the conference committee report?
No.
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 Motion to accede to the request for a conference committee. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. The motion prevails, and the clerk will...
Nope, that's it. That's it.
That's it? Okay. Announcement by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File 1856. Kriesel, Lanning, and Morrow. That's it.
A call on the member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Madam Speaker, I'd move a recess to the call of the chair until approximately 10 p.m.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If Representative Dean would yield to a question.
He yields. Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Dean, what do you anticipate we'll be doing when we come back at 10 o'clock?
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Madam Speaker and Representative Hillstrom, the Senate is currently in recess, as I understand. Our work is pretty much done until we get some more information over, but I would be likely to take up possibly the stadium bill if it were to be able to be available, as well as other miscellaneous concurrences and items such as the corrections bill, which we also need to do before adjourning.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If the DFL members will just watch your email about a possible caucus later this evening.
All those in... All those in favor of recessing until 10 p.m., please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. No. The motion prevails. We are in recess until 10 p.m.